join us here at the coordinating board, and I think we have quite a few folks who are also joining us online, so we're very happy to have them with us here as well. We are still getting some music and some sound, so if you could please use your mute function now that we're beginning the meeting, we'd appreciate it. For those of you who have put us on hold, hopefully you'll notice that we're beginning the meeting and that it's time to take your phone off of hold. It's been worse. It's been worse. I don't know. Do we have a way to block it? I think we can block all calls for now. That's another option.
Can you turn the volume up a little bit before you block all calls?
We would be happy to do that, and we won't. It sounds like the background music has ended, so we don't need to block all of you. So do feel free to break in during the meeting if you have a question or comment. Thank you. Well, welcome to all of you. We're very happy to have you here today for our Spring Community and Technical College Accountability Meeting. It's my great pleasure this morning to introduce you to our new Director of Planning, Ginger Gossman, Dr. Ginger Gossman. She actually joined us from the Research and Evaluation section of Planning and Accountability in December. She was working there as a senior research specialist and working very closely with the Pathways team. So I see Joe Carroll, Fabianchi, I see people nodding their heads. Yes, they were very happy to work with Ginger in that capacity, and I have to say I'm very, very pleased to have her now working in the planning section with all of us there. She has absolutely been immersed in data this winter between the accountability system and the almanac. We've had a busy season, and we're very excited to have all of you here today. So that Ginger has a chance to experience an accountability meeting, and next season she'll be very aware of all of the changes because she will have been part of the whole process. So I think she's really pleased to be part of this and to be here with all of you. So again, a very warm welcome to Ginger, and I'm going to turn the meeting over to her. We'll probably do some back and forth this time around because of my involvement, my pretty intense involvement in accountability this season, but next year I'm sure she'll be responsible for the system and the accountability meetings. Ginger?
Thank you, Julie. I appreciate the introduction and the welcome. I am learning a lot, as you can imagine, and I'm learning a lot because Julie is teaching me. So thank you, Julie. Just wanted to cover a few logistics. If you're in-house and you need to access Wi-Fi, we have a sign-in. There's actually not a sign-in. You just go to this link here, Education Go Get It. If you're dialing in, again, we ask that you place us on mute or place yourself on mute, not to place us on hold, because otherwise we get your music, which is lovely but distracting. If you'd like to ask a question and you're calling in, please use *6 to ask a question. For those of you in the audience, we have a spattering of microphones on your tables, and we request that you use those when you ask us questions, because then you'll be on the video and the folks listening in and calling in can hear your questions. Otherwise, they won't be able to. For most of the microphones, you just hit the button until you see a green light. It may take a moment, but there will be a green light, although there are some microphones out there where you just turn them on. So a little bit, and so for those of you calling in, if you'll just take a moment to check and make sure that you do not have us on hold. If you have us on hold, please take us off hold and mute yourself with *6. Please. I did want to let you know that the materials for today's meeting are posted online, and I'll show you where that is momentarily. You go to our homepage, upcoming events, and then the information will be posted there. I will say I found an error on the agenda as many times as I've read it. I found a mistake. Underneath this morning's discussion, we have out-of-state peer groups listed. We will not be discussing that. That's a holdover from last week's meeting, so we'll save ourselves a little time. And you can take that off of your agenda. Another item we'd like to logistically talk about is for those of you who are at the meeting today, we assume you heard about the meeting through Sue Sutton, our administrative assistant extraordinaire. If you did not hear about it from Sue, please contact her so we can add you to our distribution list. Your attendance at this meeting, either in person or via webcast, does not automatically put you on our distribution list. We want to make sure that we're able to stay in contact with you and update you with relevant information. So if you would, please contact Sue so she can add you to that list if you are not already on it. Okay, I am going to move over to the computer and just kind of walk us through some of the changes. Here is the website for you to get on and see the materials posted online. This is our homepage. The institution group and the agenda and all of the materials we're presenting today are posted there. But our first item on the agenda is to talk about changes in our accountability system during this FY. And I know that most of you are familiar with it. Was there a question?
Sorry?
Yes, I'm sorry, did we have a question from the field? I think they might have just asked. Can you hear Ginger? Are folks who are listening online, are you able to hear Ginger?
No, she's very soft.
Okay, that's what I thought I heard. Ginger, if you could maybe use a different microphone. Yeah, we've got a different microphone over at the computer. I think that's making a difference.
I will do both. I will bring the microphone closer and I will speak up. Okay. Is that an improvement? Caller? Okay.
It's an improvement. Continue to try to speak with projection.
Okay. Okay. I'll try to balance the microphone and projection. But please let us know if you're still having trouble hearing us, because we want to be able, we want you to be able to participate in the meeting. So a few changes in the accountability system. The first thing we wanted to talk about is letting you know that your peer group site has updated, where we are now including a link of historical peer groups in case you ever need that information. We did have a few changes this year. Texas Southmost College moved to medium colleges, Navarro College moved to large colleges, and North Central Texas College also moved to large colleges. So if you ever need to go back and trace where your institution was historically in terms of your peer group, you can do that here. We have the data formatted in two different ways to facilitate better searching, and it will take a moment to download, apparently. Here's one of the reports where you can actually look for your institution, and you'll see across time where your institution was categorized. And the other option is, in case you need to look at peer groups to see which institutions were in a peer group across time, you can look in this file. And this second tab holds community colleges. So we hope that information will be useful for you. It has actually already been useful for us. So we're happy to have that information posted online. One of the other changes to the accountability system is that we have included flex entry as part of the fall headcount. It's listed separately here. And that was at a suggestion of someone. One of you actually suggested that to us, and so that is in our accountability system. And this changes for both community colleges and TSTCs. I'm going to try to cover both items for community colleges and TSTCs so you can see where we made changes. Also in the in participation, actually, scroll back up. In success is where I want to be. We now are showing cohorts and percentages for the FYs shown. This is measure 11 for community colleges, and measure 13 for TSTCs. Oh, sorry about that. I apologize if I'm scrolling around and I'm giving you a headache. That is not my goal. Okay, I have the wrong measure here. But for graduation rates, we are showing, here we are, cohorts and percentages. Under transfer to institutions, to senior institutions, it looks like in the detailed files, we did not have the correct FY, and we have corrected that. So if you are in your transfer item and you go to details, this FY has been corrected, and the cohort years are now showing accurately the data that we're showing. So that's item 13 for community colleges, and it should be item 14 for TSTCs. Yes, same update. First college level course completion, which is one of our DE measures. We are presenting the same data, but we are presenting it in a different format. The tables have been updated. We're trying to make it easier for folks to digest this information. There are a little less data points, but hopefully the data will be more clear with this new table format. And it's item 14 for community colleges and item 16 for TSTCs and Lamar institutes.
And I did want to add with that first college level course measure, many of you probably remember some of our earlier discussions about measure changes, and we realized in looking, we used to have a measure that indicated how many students attempted a first college level course and then how many completed it. But we realized in spending the time analyzing the data that most institutions weren't reporting to us unless the student had actually completed. So the data was not as accurate as I think we would have liked, and we decided that the key part of this measure is actually capturing the students who do successfully complete that first college level course. And so we made the decision to just include the total number of students, those, of course, who had credit pre-matriculation, AP, dual credit, that type of thing, and then the students who actually successfully completed the first college level course. So that's why this looks different than the prior measure. A lot of it had to do with understanding what our data was actually telling us, and for the most part, we were hearing from you when the student did successfully complete that course. The item on the S actually asks you to check off if this was a first college level course that a student successfully completed. So now the S is structured so that we capture it exactly in this way.
Thank you, Julie. And then another change we've made is on items 23 and 24 for community colleges, and this is in another developmental education measure, and this is a new table format. Again, we hope it'll be easier for you to digest this information with the new format. And for Lamar and TSTC, the data items will be 17 and 18.
May I just ask, because the staff spent a lot of time working on these changes, are these new formats working better for all of you? Have you had a chance to even get in and look at the data and the new developmental education tables? If you haven't had a chance, in the past we didn't show students who were we didn't show summary data like we do now for the number of students who did not meet state standards in 1, 2, or all 3 areas, because we frequently would get phone calls saying we don't necessarily right now need the breakouts for math, reading, and writing. We have someone who's asking who hasn't met in 1 or more areas. So that's new information that we have included. You could see sort of under that summary data, that's a new area. So for those of you who weren't aware that we're now making that available, it is there, and hopefully will be useful to you if you get questions from stakeholders. Thank you.
Another change is on our data or our accountability homepage. I'm sure you are all aware of this, that success points, information on success points is posted here, formerly known as milestones. So just wanted to make sure that we point that out in case not everyone at your institution has made that language change. Also wanted to note that for statewide accountability totals for DevEd measures, the statewide totals now include all 3 DevEd measures. So just letting you know in case you need to make any state comparisons, the data are available for you. One of the other changes we made was we tried to improve the interactive functionality of our site. I think in the past where we had your option for choosing a year was on this front page, on the accountability front page, and it caused a little bit of confusion. People weren't getting the information they were really needing. So we have moved that year into the interactive system. So when you select your items, your years will show up within each item. So you still have the functionality of choosing year, but now it's within the interactive system. And hopefully this will give you the level of detail in the data that you're needing for each FY.
Yeah, and I did want to point out with that, if you remember the date on the front, that was the load year that we had on the front of accountability. So people would want data for a specific, maybe cohort year, but it would pull data for the load year. And we did have the dates within accountability. We have had those, but we had 2 different places to pull dates, and I think it got very confusing if someone pulled a date on the front of the interactive system and they went in and then they tried to pull it through this method. Sometimes the data didn't match, and we get a lot of phone calls saying, "What's going on here? Why am I seeing 2 different things?" And it's because we had load year data in one place, all the data that had been loaded into accountability for a particular accountability year, versus data having to do with a specific cohort or year. So hopefully that'll be helpful to all of you. We didn't hear from anyone who thought it was useful to have to keep the old date on the front. So,
okay,
thank you. Yeah.
And then finally, the last change we wanted to make sure everyone was aware of is when iPEDs changed their reporting date for graduation data, it bumped up the time that we could post those data in accountability. So your graduation data is more up to date than it was, and we want to thank you for working with us to make sure that data get in on time and in good shape. We are well aware of how much work it takes for you to send us data, and we really thank you for your efforts. Those are all the changes we've made for FY 2014. We'd like to think forward now to the next FY and get your feedback on where we can improve the system yet again. What ideas do you have for showing data in accountability? And again, if you're in the great wide world that is not THECB, please use *6 to make your comments. And if you're here on site, please use a microphone.
Couple people with questions. We'll start in the back. Yeah.
Hi, Chris Tikach from Lone Star. I think I appreciate all these efforts. Everything looks fantastic. Kudos to everybody at the coordinating board. Really, this is really great stuff. I think there's a marvelous opportunity, and I was just wondering if you guys are thinking about the notion of exploratory research. Now that we've got success points, what about the factors that correlate to those success points? And then how does that tie into, for example, peer group ratings? So could we do a K-cluster analysis on the factors that correlate to success points? This way, we're really comparing to other colleges that are of the same ilk. So that may have similar student populations and other factors, not just size, that type of thing. Because that overall, just exploratory research on these what an opportunity for you guys to really do value added for us.
Ginger, do you want me to address that, or would you like to?
Yes, please address that.
Okay. I'll say a couple things about success points. First of all, in terms of comparing institutions, I do want to bring up that last year we discussed peer groups, and we did take a survey, and most institutions wanted, at least for accountability purposes, to stick with size in terms of how we designate peer groups in accountability. But thinking about success points, we've had a lot of conversations about success points and about the type of data affiliated with success points that we should be making available. I think there's a couple different things that we can talk about. One is talking about sort of behind-the-scenes research. I think getting into some complicated inferential type analyses, that might not be the data we want to be putting in accountability, but it absolutely is something this group should be talking about, and we should be talking about the types of analyses we should be doing on all the data that affiliate with success points. So I'm glad you opened that conversation. But in terms of what we're showing in accountability, we've also started to have discussions about expanding what we show for success points. And one thing that we've talked a little bit about and that institutions have given us feedback about are situations where you are not able, and transfer is a good example, you aren't able to look at this student, you aren't able to get to certain numbers because we have to bring in data from other institutions. That's also true for, say, meeting TSI, because if someone was reported to us as meeting TSI at a different institution before they got to yours, and you reported to us, we do not award that point to your institution because the student had already met. So one thing we have talked about, and I'd love your feedback on if you think it would be helpful, is just showing some very straightforward data where if we're running, for example, students who have met TSI, we might show for an institution, here's the students who we found meeting, and here's the students in the cohort that you reported to us a first time, but that we found somewhere else before. So if you're trying to come up with numbers, you could say, oh, there were 10 students who we thought, oh, this is the first time they were reported as having met TSI, but the coordinating board is saying, no, we found 10 who were reported elsewhere first. So again, just some basic data with here's how many students we found for some of those measure, or first college level course, we could say, we already found that student reported with first college level course, that type of thing. So is that something that folks would find useful? I know I've had a lot of people ask me about, trying to generate the same numbers, and for things like degrees, it's very straightforward. Here are the degrees that you reported to us for the year, and pretty much that should be what's showing up in terms of success points. Obviously, if a student earns more than one, we just report one degree. Yes, Martha.
Julie, we just had our audit. And
yes.
one of the things that the auditor brought was a student-by-student analysis of every success point. That might be very helpful for everything. In other words, not just the students in the audit, but as a feedback report to us so we can see who you are actually counting points for in each area.
Okay, so obviously I'm immediately thinking FERPA issues. That would be some kind of that I think there might be some challenges, but Susan's going to come up and address that question. I was glad to see her there. This is Susan Brown, who is Assistant Commissioner in Planning and Accountability.
And I know a lot of y'all, oh my goodness.
Ginger's a little taller than Susan.
Yeah, just a little taller. I understand what you're talking about, and we could provide. Oh, that's fine. They know me. It's all right. There's some of that we could easily provide if the student did not select non-disclosure. Obviously, that's sorry, can't do it. We could do it and maybe put it out on your own. Like wherever you put your CBM reports, send it back to you as like where you pick up your edits, that sort of thing. It's not something that we could obviously put out for everybody, but we can look into how much additional work that would be for Diane. Poor Diane. And I think that would be a good way of doing it. Like I said, we have the only real problem we would have with those students who select non-disclosure.
Well, the issue is if we're going to be expected to respond to an audit for this, then it does become an error-type auditable activity that we
Yes.
need to be looking at.
And we could do that. I mean, we could, like I said, Diane's going to, hopefully she's not listening because she'll shoot me. But we try to keep Diane happy because we don't want to lose her. But yeah, that's something we could look into doing, and I think we could probably put it out where your edit reports are and send it out so that each year you would get, for each of the 3 years that are going into your 3-year average, we could probably get that out there. We'd have to obviously put the little disclaimer that these are only students that did not select for the transfer stuff.
Okay. Any other suggestions or comments related to success points or what we're showing in accountability tied to success points, information that would be helpful? Obviously, Martha's suggestion would provide a greater level of detail than what I suggested, so that, if we went in that type of direction, I don't think we would need to provide the other information. Anything in terms of what we're showing in accountability? I mean, obviously, success point information shows up in other places besides that final piece at the end that talks about success points. And I've thought about it, could we highlight measures all the way through that relate to success points? Are there measures that we want to look at tweaking so they more closely follow success points? That's certainly something that we can go ahead and do here and kind of go through and look at, and if that's something people think it's worthwhile doing. We obviously have information about degrees awarded. Whether there's anything that needs to be tweaked there might be worth looking at. So I see some nods to kind of look at that alignment, think about our success point page moving forward. Yes, Martha.
One challenge that I'm having, and I think some of the other institutions are as well, is that I'm being pressured by my board to give monthly reports updating our success points.
Oh my goodness.
As you provide information about clarifying what those are, it might also be helpful if I had something I could give to my board that easily explains when these information are available and what they're based on and why I really can't do it monthly, and by program, by the way.
We have actually run into that same sort of, not for success points, but we have been told that we need to provide information to the legislature on the degrees awarded per month. And I was like, we had multiple discussions on why that's really not feasible. And that's where you now get the preliminary degrees that we request from everybody, is because they want to know how many degrees were awarded in the fall and then in the spring and then the annual number. So that was kind of our compromise to getting it monthly, which, no, we can't do that. So we can write something up that, given our past experience, that might be helpful. We'll try. I don't know that that's going to... We still fight that battle on why we can't do things monthly. It's like, really? But anyway.
Yeah, and certainly if we could think about the way for some accountability measures we get some graphics, would something like that be helpful to think about with success points? I know sometimes presidents like graphics and dashboard type information. So, for example, Jinder, if you look at, I think graduation rates, do we have a graphic there? I'm trying to remember the places we have graphics on some of the key measures for participation and success. So, yeah, these types of graphics. So there might be something that we could do there. Would that be helpful also? I mean, obviously you can create your own, but it might be something we could build in just to give you a little more information that you can provide to boards. And then you could look at some of the statewide from this too, or the particular peer group information.
I did get a request from somebody wanting to know if we could provide the success point data on a semester-to-semester basis. And is that something, I mean, again, this is something that would be, if we're going to send back all the individual student information to you, I'm not sure that we would be able to do both. And which ones would you find most helpful? And we'll start working on that one versus the semester to semester information, because it does, if somebody gets a certificate, say in the fall semester, and then gets another associate degree in something else in the summer or that spring semester, you're only going to get, if it's all within one fiscal year, they'll only get counted once. So I think maybe that was kind of the impetus for wanting all that.
Yes, Chris.
But even knowing that really helps us.
Okay.
We're kind of stuck in a situation which now our leaders are looking at these numbers and they're coming to us and say, that's great, how do I change it? And the more that data that you could provide us, the more that we can work with it and provide them more actionable data based upon that. You've given us goals to take a look at and where the finishing line is. That data will help us in supporting our institutions in getting there.
Okay.
So, yeah, stuff like that is fantastic.
Okay, so doing it semester by semester versus what was recommended earlier, where we send you back all the students. Which one would you rather us work on first, because I have limited resources?
Soon?
I'd actually like to have the student by student rather than the other report.
How many would say student by, I know folks at home. I
All right, well, we'll start with the student by student, and then we'll get to the second part of that.
The other thing I'm sorry, Don? Yes,
yeah,
Don Perry.
This was brought up in the fall at the liaisons meeting, and I'm going to bring it up again because I think it's really an issue. I know you, Susan, you said that the ACC signed off on this, but the fact is that reporting graduates once a year when we have certificates and associate degrees being awarded in the same fiscal year is underreporting the truth.
No, you report them to us anyway.
I understand that, but for success points calculation?
Okay.
Thank you. I also want to add, in terms of Chris's comment about getting information out, one thing that can be hugely helpful to us in terms of the success points is trying to get that S and 002 certified in a timely manner. I think often those are the reports that have been left for later, and it's certainly, as we're trying to run measures and get information out there and get it online. I mean, I know accountability, some of the DevEd measures, we track them for 4 years, so we don't put the information there right away for when students have met and those types of things, but we do show it other places, and it can be a delay for us if we've got institutions who with issues. Now, I know there have been some things going on related to those reports, and we've had some research and things, but we're moving forward. I think institutions are starting to prioritize those reports a little bit more, and the more you can, and I know all of you prioritize all of the reports, but the more you can get that message back to folks at your institutions, that can be very helpful too in terms of what we're able to get out there and getting new information out there, at least in a reasonably timely manner. So thank you. Thank you for that whenever that's possible.
Any other changes for FY 2015 you'd like to suggest? Okay, we'll move on to the next item in our agenda, and I will hand things over to Dr. Eklund.
Thank you, Ginger. I've been having fun thinking about name that voice. I think I heard Jamie Templeton out there, but I don't know. I am now going to be talking a little bit about the Higher Education Almanac, and we just got the copies last week, so I'm very excited to be able to show you. They're finding out upstairs if I'm going to be able to share some with all of you who are here today. So we're doing some counts for what we need. It's so early. They're always a little more protective of our hard copies this time of year because there's lots of folks that they go to at the legislature and leadership at institutions. But I'll see if we'll be able to get you copies. But this is the new almanac. I want to thank all of you very much much for the work that you did in reviewing it when we sent it out in February this year. I think we gave you a little more time than last year. I think we got it to you 2 days ahead of time last year and gave you about a week and a half this year. We'll try to do even better next year, but as you know, we're on a tight timeline. But really, that was very helpful, and there were some things that all of you caught that really made a difference to us. So we very much appreciate that, and I wanted to make sure if you looked at it or other people at your institution did, please thank them for us, because the more eyes, the better. But we do have the new almanac out, and we have a new page in the almanac. It's an earnings profile. Many of you are probably aware that there's a lot of interest in workforce data right now and information tracking students from higher ed to the workforce. Last year, I think we told you about the new Compare College Texas app. That's going to be updated with the new almanac information and the new workforce information. In fact, I think it might be out there now, or we're close to having that, I think, out there with the updated information. But we thought it would be helpful to have a page in the almanac with some very high-level earnings data, just to illustrate the kind of data that we are now making available through places like Compare College Texas and the economic success metrics. I'm sorry?
We have a new website that will be out of soon.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. You said cruise. Yes.
The Texas Cruise website that's going to be out, and it will actually have the 1, 3, 5, 8, and 10-year earnings by program, all that information. It will also have loan amount, average loan amount for those students who have loans.
Loans and artists?
All loan debt they carry.
Yeah. And this one page will kind of show you the two types of data that are going to be out there. We did, in the first illustration, you can see we have data 1, 3, 5, 8, and 10 years out by level. We also show it by program area, and then we have 1-year data. So that data is for 2002, because to track 10 years, you have to go back. So we also thought it was important to show more up-to-date data. So we show 1-year earnings, which is the type of data that has been put out there now. We show 1-year earnings for, I believe it's 2011 in the almanac, because we have to track, beyond graduation for a year, and we show that by level and by program. And I'm sorry, this slide isn't great, but the almanac is available online. I don't have hard copies for you, but it is online, so you are able to find it there, and hopefully take a look at some of this information. And there were some interesting patterns that we saw. This is not intended to be comprehensive in terms of the programs. We just selected some programs that we thought would be of interest in terms of the program level data, and that's the data that's in blue on this. And some shifts that were surprising to us, some differences in terms of the majors, and some things that were what we might have expected. So I want you to know that this is in the almanac. Here's a little highlight there. We wanted to spend a little bit of time at the meeting today talking about the designation for Hispanic serving institutions, because I am the person who is charged with putting these designations in the almanac the last 2 years, and it is very confusing. I think fortunately the Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities has a wonderful page on their website that talks about the definitions and the lists and provides some really good information. But basically the message is there's no official list, so we are not able to find an official list. And in terms of any federal designations, they really can vary depending on the purpose, if someone's applying for grants, that type of thing. Now, the federal designations do base it on 25% full-time student equivalent for Hispanic students. When I talked to the university folks, they said whether someone's a full-time equivalent or not, a person is a person, and if you're trying to tailor programs for Hispanic students at your institution, a head count would make more sense. Now, that was the folks at the universities, they have a much smaller percentage of part-time students than the community colleges do, and the technical colleges. So I wanted to see if all of you thought it might be appropriate for the almanac to come up with a list that basically just shows institutions that have a head count of 25% or higher students that are Hispanic. It moves away a little bit from the federal designation that way. Whether it's appropriate for us to even be calling institutions HSIs with that list, I don't know, but I do know that Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities produces that list. They basically say lists get very confusing, so we're going to have, one that looks more like a federal list because the feds don't have a list, but that takes some of those things into account. I think they have a list of their member institutions that are HSIs, but they also have a list that is strictly based on head count. So would folks be amenable to us in the almanac just using a strict head count designation for Hispanic serving institutions for the purpose of the almanac? And if so, should we call it HSI or should we give it another name? We could just say Hispanic serving. Soon, yes.
I think it depends on what the purpose of designating HSI. We just went through a couple of years ago getting our HSI designation through the feds. And as you said, the definition is somewhat complex. It's not just 25% FTE, I mean full-time equivalent. Excuse me. So, and I know HACU, they have their designation, but what is the purpose for your designation in the almanac? And is it something that maybe we change the HSI to something a little different that's not tied to the federal designation? I'm just afraid tying it to the same letters as the federal designation may confuse people because you have to have that federal HSI designation to be eligible for grant funding.
And that's similar to what we heard from the universities. However, what we have heard from them was that some of the federal programs are now kind of going away from that actual designation. And so even if you are 25% of your headcount, you can still apply for some of those federal grants. I don't know. But that's probably a good idea, is to move away from that same designation and come up with a, even if you just say you're a HACU designated Hispanic institution. We've done it mainly because we're getting a lot of requests from legislatures saying, well, who's a Hispanic serving, who serves most of the Hispanic students in the state. So that's why we did that designation. It wasn't really, there's no grant tied to it, there's no funds, there's no money tied to this in any way, shape, or form. So, sorry, wish there was, but, that's the way that goes.
As someone in the university meeting pointed out, you never know when they might tie something, as we learned with the
never know.
Emerging
they
research.
Tend to tie things to, you go, really? And so, anyway, so that's it. But I like your idea of maybe just putting a different, just put in there a HACU,
Hispanic serving, maybe.
On that list, and that would kind of take care of it, saying, okay, this is where we got it, this is the list we're using, and we're using it. And here you go. And so that's probably a good idea. Yeah,
it's hard with districts, too, some of the community college districts that have campuses that report separately to us, because some of the campuses are not 25% and the districts are, and the districts have been designated HSI, but we can't tell what the campus is. I know for universities we had an issue with Sul Ross and Sul Ross Rio Grande because of how they report to the feds together, and Sul Ross Rio Grande in my mind is a Hispanic serving institution, but I think they weren't on some list just because of some of the technicalities for how things are done. So do I see maybe some nodding of heads that we will continue to have something in the almanac but we'll tie it to 25% head count Hispanic students, and that's great because that links into accountability. You can easily look and see if we got it right or not and say, hey, wait a minute, in accountability it says that campus is 26% and it's not on the list, or vice versa. So we've got a little more accountability with what we're doing with that too. So all right, moving forward, we'll go ahead and do that. It's pretty much what I think we ended up doing this time with a few little tweaks, but it does get confusing. So I'm seeing some head nods. That'll work for everyone. We'll call it something a little bit different, and we'll tie it back to the HACU definition of 25% or more in terms of head count for Hispanic students. Okay, great. Well, that'll make it a lot easier for me. Okay, I have something else from the almanac. We had at TARE. a person who is with us today brought up a suggestion that I thought was an excellent suggestion, tied to the two-year faculty member information that we show in the almanac. Right now, we show the total faculty count, the full-time faculty count, and then we show the percent of the full-time faculty members. And it was proposed that because with the total faculty count and the full-time faculty count, you can easily come up with that percent, especially if you're an IR person, that maybe we should show something a little bit different in terms of the third measure tied to faculty. As you are probably aware, space is very, very limited in the almanac. Those big comparison sheets are crammed full of information, and I'm going to have to get new reading glasses if we add any more. So I thought the suggestion was a very good one to include, rather than the percent of full-time faculty, include the percent of semester credit hours taught by full-time faculty, with the understanding being that you could have a whole lot of adjunct faculty who are teaching one course, and your percent full-time faculty is not maybe going to really represent what is happening in the classroom at your institution. Whereas if we show the percent of semester credit hours taught by full-time faculty, that will perhaps be a better measure, especially now that we have information that's getting out to students and other stakeholders through our compared college texts and other places. We thought maybe that's a good way to provide all the information, because certainly with the total faculty and head count for full-time, you can get to the other number. Would folks be in agreement that we should go ahead and do that? Yes, and Tom is the one who suggested it, so I'm going to let him. Tom Martin. Oh, am I off? Oh, student contact. Well, then I'm glad you brought it up. Okay. Okay, then I apologize for misunderstanding. We all say hours, and sometimes are hearing different things. So does it make more sense for contact hours? Would folks prefer that we do contact hours? I'm seeing nods. And that's doable, Susan, and we've got that information. So we'll go ahead and make that change for the almanac for next year. Thank you. Okay. Okay, how many of you were at TARE this winter? Just about all of you, I thought. So I'm going to very quickly go through the legislative update, because a lot of this is information that was presented at the TARE conference in February. And please interrupt me if you want more information, but I don't want to spend a lot of time on if it's something that we haven't any updates since the last meeting. I'll certainly, for any topics where I've got new information, I'll certainly share that with you. And there are some instances where we have some new information on some of our initiatives that have come from related to legislative activity. Okay, so we talked about the Sunset Bill. The coordinating board is reauthorized for 12 more years. All of you are aware, of course, that we now have outcomes-based funding for community and technical colleges. Of course, it looks very different for the community colleges versus the technical colleges. Time to degree, we have the changes that relate to time to degree and credits to degree, number of hours for associate's degree. In terms of the financial aid programs, we saw some changes. Probably one of the biggest ones is the shift for the Texas Grant and Beyond Time for universities only, and then the TEOG, those monies. And obviously there's a transition period going on here, but I think most people are aware that we have made that change now in terms of the pools of money that are funding student aid, financial aid. In terms of the Sunset Bill, I think most of you are aware of some of the changes that came through in the Sunset Bill. I do want to talk a little bit about negotiated rulemaking, and I think that's on the list there. I had the opportunity a couple of weeks ago to sort of sit in as an available witness at a negotiated rulemaking session. It was actually a very interesting session. I thought it was very, very valuable session. bringing together stakeholders from institutions around the state to provide feedback, which we're doing in several instances for several different rulemaking areas. I know we've got a session coming up this week related to HB5 and college prep courses. The one I sat in on had to do with TSI and related somewhat to new mathways, but also issues issues related to math and TSI. So it's just wanted to make sure everyone's aware that this is happening, but there is still opportunity for all institutions to have feedback on rules through the regular process through the Texas Register. So that part hasn't changed. Rules are still being made available, but it's after the negotiated rulemaking process. Susan?
Yeah, the way that works is we go through a negotiated rulemaking, and once the committee agrees on a proposed rule, it gets posted into the Texas Register, and then we send it out to all your institutions for comment. There's a 30-day comment period. Once we get all those comments in, then the coordinating board staff will draft a response. We send that response out to everybody who is a part of the negotiated rulemaking. And then if we get agreement from everybody that, yeah, that response is correct and we're good, whether there's changes to be made or not changes to be made. If everybody's in agreement, then that's what goes forward to, it goes directly to our board. It does not go through committee. At that point, it goes straight to the board. If there is not agreement from everybody on the negotiated rulemaking committee that the responses to the comment are correct, then that group gets pulled back in, those differences get ironed out, and then it goes to our board. But as Julie said, it does not eliminate anybody from the 30-day comment period. Everybody still has a chance to comment whether you're on the negotiated rulemaking committee or not. So that part has not changed. The big change is that it goes straight to our board and not to a committee and then to a board.
And I also wanted to add that we had several staff members from the coordinating board who attended extensive training to serve as facilitators for those negotiated rulemaking meetings. And I was going to say, was there a case where there was an outside facilitator? If there's something that we think will be very controversial, we have hired outside. There's a state agency that does training for mediation, that sort of the negotiated rulemaking. We have had them come into one of our meetings, and that group is continuing. We did have, I think we've had 8 staff members currently trained on the mediation and facilitating negotiated rulemaking. We did that because we were charged with negotiated rulemaking. However, we were not given any money, and those external facilitators charge about $1,000 a day. So we have to do negotiated rulemaking, but you don't get any more money to do negotiated rulemaking. So we kind of ran into this. Okay, so I think right now it's that unfunded mandate that I know none of y'all have ever heard of before. So what we did is we had staff trained. So far, that seems to be working fairly well. We haven't had any big issues on any of the ones that except for the one that we expected, which of course is my area. And other than that, everything's gone pretty smoothly on the negotiations from what I can tell. Okay, any questions about negotiated rulemaking while we have Susan here with us? Okay, and this is just basic information about outcomes-based funding, and I think everyone is aware that as a result of the session for 16-17, the Coordinating Board and TAC and the Formula Funding Committee are looking at a model for success points that will allow an institution to be compared against itself. So that's ongoing. And Gary, Susan's going to talk about, in just a couple of minutes, she's going to talk about outcomes-based funding and provide more detail there. But I just wanted to quickly walk you through the workforce studies. I think many of you are probably aware that we have contracted with RAND to conduct two reports tied to legislatively required workforce studies. That's related to SB 414 and HB 1296. I hope I got the numbers right. 414 is the Community College Baccalaureate Study, and HB 1296 is workforce modeling. HB 2036, I just wanted to mention here so you're aware of it. That's a bill that's tied to the Texas's bicentennial, and it does tie in planning for higher education. And Susan, it looks like, wanted to address that.
It is the legislative committee that will be looking at a long-term plan for higher education. So far, the House the governor's office have appointed 3 or 4 people, however many they're supposed to appoint. None of the House or the Senate neither of them have even appointed their members to that. Don't know when that's going to happen. Don't know when they're going to meet. 2036 is about all we know about it.
Yeah, the legislation does say to work in collaboration with the coordinating board. And Susan's going to talk a little in a few minutes about the higher ed strategic plan for 2030. So hopefully there will be, and I believe everyone hopes that there will be some work together integrating any kind of higher education planning for Texas that's moving out into the future. Okay, so very quickly, and a lot of this is information I provided at TARE, so I want to move on to where we stand now. But for the baccalaureate study, the workforce study, is due in February, and a lot of that work is based on modeling and coming up with a model to estimate workforce gaps and shortages, and to look at specific fields of need, and then to recommend a model that can be used broadly for us to be able to better project workforce needs over time. So that work is ongoing, but it'll be a little while. It'll be next fall before we have information on that. But the Community College Baccalaureate Study is the one that's due to the legislature August 1st. There's a lot of activity that's been going on around the state related to that, and it's to develop a process to look at statewide and regional needs for bachelor's degrees in nursing and applied science fields, determine appropriate providers, and then to determine if community colleges are appropriate to offer those degrees. So let me just show you the timeline for where we are on these two studies. There was a webinar presented statewide. How many of you had an opportunity to participate in that? Do we have some folks? Looks like just a few. That is online now, I believe, so if you're interested in learning more, it's a very detailed webinar about the process for the baccalaureate study. But that was presented in March. And also at the March Coordinating Board Committee meeting, the Committee for Affordability, Accountability, and Planning, we had Charles Goldman from RAND who presented for almost 2 hours to the Coordinating Board about that study. And so if you weren't able to do the webinar, but you got to hear that, it was pretty much the same information. There is a draft report that is going to be presented to the Coordinating Board at the meeting on April 24th. So if you're interested in looking at the report, and I think institutions probably will be, whether it's through your office or elsewhere, that draft report is going to be presented April 24th, and it will be posted. The draft report will be posted on the 25th. It will be out there for about 3 weeks for institutional comment. So that would be the appropriate time. If institutions have any comments about what is provided in the report, that would be the time to get the information back. And I would assume when it's posted, there'll be something more specific than mid-May in terms of the comment period. It just wasn't set yet when I did the slides. Do we know yet, or?
We don't know yet.
Okay, so we'll make sure to give you a date, and then the final report will go to the board in July, and the report will go to the legislature in August. In terms of the workforce report, that will go to the CAP committee in September, the draft report in October, and then the final report will go to the board in July. And I would assume we'll be having webinars. January. We'll be having webinars around that coming up soon. I have these notes right here. I don't need to be. It's just natural to want to look up at the PowerPoint. Okay. So in terms of other bills, most of you are aware of these bills, but I put them in the slides so they're available if folks want to look. And we do have a nice summary on the coordinating board website about legislation related to higher education from the last session. High school related, we're going to have a session after lunch. Folks from our P16 division are going to talk about HB 5. I did want to talk a little bit today about HB 2550. These are the Consolidated Higher Education Assistance Plans. Are most of you familiar with the HB 2550 legislation and the plans? I see a lot of nods, yes. We did do a webinar in February related to this. We sent out the survey link to your presidents. I think that's a key thing for you to know. And let's see if that's on the... I've got some general information about it, but I did want to give you the... Oops, here we go. Okay. Yes, we sent a letter on March 19th. It went to the community college liaisons and to presidents with the link to the survey. Basically, institutions provide information to the coordinating board about their assistance plans through this survey. It's very similar to DEPS. Rather than something complicated like URRS, we developed a survey where you can tell us, hey, these are the things that I'm doing with higher ed. These are the things that I'm doing with the high schools that have been identified as low performing in terms of the percentage of students going on to higher education. So the survey was sent. We are required by law to put information about plans into our Closing the Gaps progress report, and we are also required to put information about how students are performing at those high schools. So we came up with several metrics. We're going to use all metrics that are already reported to us. So really, I don't think it's too onerous for the institutions to report this information to us. It's pretty much just let us know who you're working with, let us know what you're doing. We will put information out there about how those high schools are doing in terms of their students enrolling in higher ed, in terms of the dual credit happening there. We'll give you some demographic breakouts for those schools in terms of who's enrolling and who's not. And that, again, will be posted on our Closing the Gaps progress report. So hopefully will be helpful. The other thing since the webinar that we agreed to do, because some universities actually asked us, because universities, I think this is a little harder for them if they haven't been working as closely with schools, and also the legislation talks about the school in closest proximity, so that can be confusing. The coordinating board hasn't provided specific guidance on that because it's pretty much, it turns it over to the institutions to work with the schools, but I would encourage you just to be in touch with the universities and your community regarding this if you are working with schools and you think that they are also, certainly coordinated efforts are the best. But we did agree that now that we have posted the list of schools, we did agree that when we get the survey back, if we have schools that no one has reported that they're working with them, we will put that out there. So you'll be able to go ahead and look at that list and say, oh, wait a minute, no one's working with this school and that's in my area, and I thought, such and such community college or university was going to work with them. So look for that probably sometime in May or June, and hopefully that'll be helpful to you. Okay, any questions about the HB 25? Yes? Okay. Well, the way the list worked, and I found it a little, at first I had to have a little help with trying to interpret it, is a school, we have to have had students reported as graduating from that school. Now, if it shut down right after the most recent graduating class, because I think it went through 12, then we wouldn't know that. We don't get information from TEA about graduates until...
But this way, we just, about 3 or 4 days ago, got the FY13 high school graduate data from TEA. So there is a lag there.
Right.
And I used to think we were slow, but, we don't have 1,200 districts to deal with. So
yeah, certainly.
They have a lot of cleanup to do.
And if a school isn't there anymore, obviously, no one is charged with working with it. Sometimes it's a challenge for us. Sometimes we can't tell about a school based on the name of the school, what type of school it is, or the information. Obviously, institutions want to be using judgment in terms of looking at the schools and thinking about should it be a community college or a university that's partnering with the school. We only show schools that have 25, or I think more than 25 graduates. So, you're not going to have those tiny little schools. And the way it works is a school has to, in the past 5 years, has to have had 2 consecutive years of being on the list. So that can get kind of confusing too to sort out the schools. I had a couple of universities call and say, we're not sure this is the greatest way to do the list. We'll revisit that next year. We'll kind of take a look, see who's partnering with whom, try to get a feel for what we've put out there and whether it's useful. We basically use the HB 400 list because that's what everyone. That's the feedback we were getting. That folks suggested that we do that, but there may be some tweaks that need to be made as we move forward. And by law, the CB does determine who goes on the list.
David,
Okay.
if you do know of charter schools that have closed down, if you just send us which ones they are, that would be helpful. Okay.
Good, thanks.
Perfect.
Oh, so you've already done it. Was it fairly straightforward to complete? Good to hear that. Okay.
Julie, so the deadline is tomorrow then for that survey?
April 15th, yes. The deadline is tomorrow. So you may want to check back with your institutions and make sure that that has happened. I know with community colleges it's been just wonderful to have the liaisons because they, get that information and hopefully get it to the right place if it goes to the presidents. I did hear from a couple of universities that said they have no idea where the survey is sitting and if anyone's doing anything with it. But you may want to check back at your institutions just to see. And we'll probably take a look at the end of the week. If you find you haven't done it yet, it'll probably be the end of the week by the time we go in and take a look and see what's missing, and we'll get something out to institutions, some kind of a reminder letter if we're missing information. Okay, I think that's it for my presentation. I think Ginger, are we ready to?
No. It's me.
Okay.
Yes, we'll pull up Susan Brown's presentation, and she'll be talking with you about formula funding.
And Tom anybody else who is working on this can kind of chime in as we go. As Julie said, in the 14-15 biennia, there was outcomes was adopted, but in addition to that, there was a rider that said that the coordinating board and the community colleges will work together to develop a methodology for the institutions to compete against themselves. And I am so glad that TAC did a whole lot of work before they got us involved. So I didn't have to do nearly as much work. And Gary is actually traveling today, so I'm Gary. So I'm going to go through a little bit. Most of you probably already know, I say this every chance I get. Formulas are an allocation. They are not a budgeting tool. They are an allocation tool. They take the amount of money that is provided by the legislature and they equitably distribute it among all the districts. That's what they are. They do not budget. Don't even think they budget. Don't think because you go up one, you're going to get more money. It all depends on how much money is given to the legislature. And that became a struggle as we went through trying to determine how institutions could compete against themselves. Here's the timeline. The formula committee actually started in August. We had been working with TAC. I don't know when TAC started, Tom, but we started working with TAC in late spring of last year. So this has been kind of at least a year-long process for the coordinating board and probably longer than that for y'all. The board will adopt formula recommendations in April. June 1st, it has to go to the legislature and the governor's office. And then November, December, we go through we get the formula runs November 1st, which is why everybody's like pressed to get information. And then we have to have January, the session starts. They use that November data as a starting point for what's going to be in, I guess this time it'll be HB1. And then in March, when we do our, get the final run that goes to the legislature, that is what they'll substitute in for the amount of funding going forward for the allocation of the funding. Let's go forward. Here's the recommendation. This pie chart just kind of shows how much is appropriated, and that's in the green. So you get formula, general GR, which for the community colleges is 100% GR, not so much for the state colleges and the technical colleges. You get benefits. There's a few special items, not very many, and then there's other general revenue that you receive. Most of it, tuition and fees, none of your tuition and fees, auxiliary enterprises, none of that is appropriated, which is very different than for the universities and the health-relateds. This is what it's intended to cover. It doesn't cover it. We all know it doesn't cover it. This is what it was intended to cover. For the community colleges in the 14-15 biennium, this was a big shift. We got away from the small institution supplement, and each district gets $1 million in base funding. That is a big shift, and it doesn't matter size. Everybody gets $1 million across the board. Then the remaining money was split up, 10% for outcomes-based and 90% based on the contact hours. Success points, this is not a big surprise for everybody. These are the success points that we've been talking about. Then we came into the allocation for next biennium, how to compete against yourselves. What was developed and was adopted by the Formula Advisory Committee, has been adopted by the board committee, and is going forward to the legislature and, well, it's going forward to the coordinating board. I will be extremely surprised if they make changes at this point, since they didn't really have any questions, is that we took the amount of funding that was allocated, the $172 million that was allocated for success points, divided that by the total number of points for all institutions, came up with about $185 per success point. The 3-year average that was used for the 14-15 biennia is then we will take the number of points that are generated in 16-17. Each point will be worth $185. So that if you lose points, you will get less money in success points. If you increase your number of points, you will get $185 per point in additional funding. The remaining money that is set aside by the legislature will go to the contact hours. I mean, you'll still have the core $1 million for each district, and then the remaining money will get allocated through contact hours. Now, what we are going forward in requesting of the legislature is that they fund any increase in success points at the $185 per point, so that it does not change that 10% and 90% split. That is a request. That is a request from TAC. That is a request from the coordinating board. You know, hopefully that happens. So what we are also doing, so here's the request. You'll have $50 million in core funding, $185 per point, $172 million if nothing changes. It will go up if things change. That's the request. And then we'll increase the average contact hour funding up to $6.12. It's $5 and I want to say 60-something cents right now. So increase the funding per contact hour also. Okay, state colleges, because you have different state colleges, they remove tuition, part of the tuition and fees. So theirs is an all funds rate, not a GR rate. So for the state colleges, the funding rate is a little higher. They also get predicted square feet, anticipating about a 4% increase in the predicted square feet, which increases their infrastructure, and then there's no change to the small institution supplement. So, David, for y'all, basically nothing changes. TSTC, we have a whole new model. Theirs is called the return value model, and it is based on looking at the number of students who attended TSTC and earned at least 9 semester credit hours. The coordinating board captures the idea of those students. Then we compare it to the workforce for 5 years out. and the amount that is over minimum wage becomes the value added by TSTC. So then we do a discounting, apply to the quarterly wages, and get a standard 7% tax rate, which is what we got from the comptroller's office, and that turns into the amount of funding. It's based on, we divide students by level, so it's for associate degrees, certificates, all the way through, including leavers. So if they've had over 9 hours when they leave, and leavers are those students who do not show back up at TSTC or anywhere else in the next 2 years. And so that's how theirs is calculated. This shows the actual amount that we're recommending for each institute, for each sector of two-year colleges. So percentage change in the amount that we're increasing, and that's the recommended amount. Are there any questions about any of this? TSTC is kind of all by yourself, and you know all about yours, and David knows about theirs. Are there questions about the success points for many of you? Did I mess any of that up, Tom? Got it right? Woohoo. That's good, because that's what I told our board. So, all right. I am next on the agenda, and I don't even have a PowerPoint for this one. We have a new committee that we actually requested all the institutions to refer people to us. We have a new higher ed strategic planning committee. As you all know, Closing the Gaps by 2015, we are almost to 2015. So we've pulled in a group of representatives for a new higher education plan to develop it's the 2030 plan or Beyond Closing the Gaps. We don't have a standard name for it, so anybody has a real catchy name, we'd love to hear it, because we're marketing people. And so what we've done is we have included former trustees, former community college administrators, former university administrators, former university regents, and some business people to come in and start meeting. They met in March. They're going to meet tomorrow. They will be meeting monthly through at least October or so to develop a plan on what, and we're going to use the same principles that we use for Closing the Gaps, which are a very few number of goals, a few interim targets, because this plan will be going out to 2030 and maybe 2036, depending on what that commission does. We'll see. But our plan is to do 2030. So we would like to have, measurable goals. We would like for them to have some targets for like 2020, 2025, so that you can kind of tell how you're doing, how the progression is going. So far, I can tell from the discussions we're having, there will be a much closer tie to the workforce. They're really wanting to look at workforce issues and how are we doing. There is, at least in the 2036 Commission, there is a discussion about 60% of the workforce needs to have some type of educational credential, certificate, associate degree, or higher, something like that. So we're trying to take into account some in-migration. So we have a lot of in-migration compared to other states. Of course, then you tie all this to the economy and, trying to predict the economy going out 15 years is almost as much fun as trying to predict what programs you need in 15 years, So we're trying to take all of that into account. We are also building into it a review cycle to where every 5 years it will be reviewed to see if not only are we on track, but also do we have the right workforce metrics? Is there a new industry that has come up that needs something totally different? All that sort of thing. So we'll be working on that. We'll be using some of the data from the SB 414 and HB 1296 that Julie talked about earlier, the workforce things about what type of models do we have that can predict what type of graduates we'll need. And so that's all moving forward. We'll keep you posted on what comes up. Like I said, they've only had one meeting right now. If you can, as I said, former, what we try to do is we're trying to get a very statewide perspective. So we did not include anybody on the original on this committee who is currently associated with an institution at all, because we want them to take a statewide perspective. That's a very important thing for this. Yes, there are very localized needs that are important, but for this committee, where do we want the state to be in 15 years? You have to have the statewide perspective. If the committee decides to pull in task force or develop task force, that's when we will probably be going back to the institutions to get current administrators or trustees or regents, that sort of thing, onto the committee. And Tom has a question. I believe so.
The first one was.
Oh, okay, good.
Well, they have been.
I have to be here, so I don't know. Yes, they are accessible. They'll be broadcast. If we broadcast the first one, we'll be broadcasting all of them. We do actually have Steve Murdoch is a consultant. So we're getting a lot of input now. He's not going to be available tomorrow, but he did a long presentation at the first meeting talking about what he sees, because he just put out his new book, for those that don't know, Texas Challenge, Continue Changing Texas, I don't know. Steve's latest book, just this, either this fall or actually after the first year, I believe. So Steve Murdoch is actually on the committee as a consultant. So we'll continue to have him very involved in this whole thing. Woody Hunt is actually the chair of the committee. So anybody from El Paso knows Woody. Larry Faulkner is the vice chair. We have, let's see, we have a whole list out online. From the community colleges, we have James Anderson from Central Texas College is on there. They've been, Wright Lassiter is on there. Didn't hear that one. I don't know. Anyway, so there's, we had a pretty good mix of people that were nominated. I do expect them to probably have at least one task force, if not two. There's been a lot of discussion about international versus national, whether we should actually be targeting international. This is still there. I think this first meeting is really getting to know each other and kind of where each person stands. Shirley Neely Richardson now. She's gone back. She's Shirley Richardson at this point. Is on the committee. Former commissioner of K-12. She's on the committee. So we have it's a pretty good group. There's some interesting conversations if you listen to it. They don't all agree. So our job will be to keep them on task and keep them moving forward. And so we're going to be herding cats a little bit to get them moving. But they're having some very interesting conversations. So at least I think they're talking about the right things. So we'll be talking about what type of strategies are most important for those that were around when Closing the Gap started. We really focused on what are the key strategies, not on what should institutions be doing very specifically. One of the things is we like to point out is we did not include graduation rates in Closing the Gaps. That is not one of the measures at all, because we want graduates. We want a student to graduate. We don't necessarily care. Well, for the student, it's better if they do it faster. But we wanted to count graduates. How you get them there is up to you. What you do on your campus is up to you. We want to set, here are the big goals, and then y'all need to get, then y'all tell us the best way to get there for your campus, because it's different for every campus. Students are not the same, and institutions are not the same. So are there any other questions about that? Okay.
And may I just add something, because I know we have all these wonderful IR folks here who sometimes might know resources that we don't. If you are aware of any resources, specifically maybe related to global information or educational attainment, obviously we're using American Community Surveys data, but if you are aware of any resources that you think we may not be aware of, please let us know. We'd appreciate that.
Especially if you have anything that includes certificates.
Yes,
because the American
exactly what I was thinking.
American Community Surveys does not include certificates. There is SIPP, and I can't remember what it stands for at the moment. They do break it out at a national level to include some certificates. It's not at the state level, however, so, a lot of this is taking that national level data and kind of going backwards. We will be having a discussion tomorrow about the different types of what is meant by a certificate versus certification versus, in why it may or may not always be appropriate to compare things internationally. So that's going to be part of the discussion tomorrow. And if you have measures that you think should be included, that are big, broad measures or strategies, once we get some measures, feel free to just send us an email or call us and say, look, this is really important, and this is, not down into the nitty-gritty, because we're not going into the nitty-gritty. We're trying to keep everybody at a high level so that it gives institutions the flexibility that they deserve.
Thank you, Susan, for those updates. And again, if you have any feedback for us related to the Higher Education Strategic Planning Committee, we'd really appreciate it. And that was the Survey of Income and Program Participation. That's what SIPP stands for, just in case you need to know. Hail to Google for telling me that. So let's move on with our agenda. I'd like to invite Jana Kosar to present next. Jana, would you like to come up, or would you like to?
I'll come up in just a minute, but I want to show you where the guidelines are posted. So we have recently, as of Friday, posted the voluntary guidelines for reporting first college level courses. So they're in two places. They are in Appendix Q of the reporting manuals. So you can see them here, Appendix Q. And under participation, select more, and then guidelines for reporting first college level courses. Here you have a link to the same guidelines, but also to a presentation with some additional background information, similar to what I'm going to show in a minute, or what I'm going to show are selections from that presentation. I'm just looking for my PowerPoint. Yeah. Oh, she didn't grab it. Yeah. Okay, so these guidelines we are now at the end of a very, very long process. We had stakeholder meetings where we had faculty and staff from I think over 30 institutions. I don't remember the exact number right now, but we had over 30 representatives helping us to prepare these guidelines. And that included folks from the Dev Ed side as well as the college level course side. And so I think you really see that that great deal of collaboration built into these guidelines. And again, these are voluntary, but we do hope that they provide clarification on reporting first college level courses. So the guidelines look very different for each of the 3 subject areas. So we'll start with the reading. And for the guidelines in reading, I think the key idea is that students read college level texts in English as an essential aspect of that course. And then the stakeholder group identified the key course criteria. And I'm not going to read each of those, but you can read them. But this is what the stakeholder group identified as what makes a course in reading. And additionally, for something to be a first college level course in reading, it needs to be 3 semester credits, and it needs to have a TSI requirement in reading. So now, here's the key thing. So there are sets of courses, and I want to clarify something. So we've got courses that will always count if they're at least 3 semester credit hours and have a TSI requirement in reading, and that's the first group. Because our stakeholder group found that the ACGM and the learning outcomes in the ACGM, the reading criteria were embedded. So that's the difference between that and the second group are courses that are likely to have meet the course criteria in reading, but there is some variation in the way that institutions implement the courses. So you would need to look and make sure that your course does meet those criteria. We also have, and so history, government, psychology, sociology, philosophy, those are the ones that will always count based on the learning outcomes. Like English 1301 and 1302, I'll just touch on that specifically. Some institutions don't require a lot of reading in those courses, while others do. So we did find a lot of variation, and that was what came out of the stakeholder meetings, that there is variation in the way those courses are implemented. So you'll just need to look at your own implementation of these courses. And then we have a few courses that are specifically not recommended. They are courses in art, music, or theater other than those identified above. Okay, well, sorry, I should have looked at the courses that will count. We've got art, music, and theater history courses, but then other than that, courses in art, music, or theater are not recommended. Foreign language courses are not recommended, as well as learning frameworks courses. And we looked at the learning frameworks courses and studied that, and what we find are different course outcomes. The distribution of course outcomes looks different for the learning frameworks. And did you want to say?
I was going to say, we also found that we thought maybe more institutions were reporting them than, and actually we went back and actually looked at the data, and I think there was only one or two institutions that were consistently reporting that as a first college level course, which was, folks asked us to look at that in the meetings because they weren't sure if, half the institutions were doing that or if it was very rare, and as it turns out, it was very rare.
Okay. And then the next, so if your institution does wish to use a course that's not on the list, you just need to look at the course criteria, and then you can use those courses. So that list is not a definitive list, but rather, I think it tries to provide the courses that most institutions are using, but then you do have some flexibility.
And I did want to add with this, and I think we changed one word in the final document to the institutions are advised. This is for your benefit to just keep documentation. Again, these are voluntary guidelines, but it's just as part of the voluntary guidelines, we're putting in a guideline that, we would advise you to keep documentation. So you'll have records, or if someone new comes in, you'll have a record for why you've chosen to include a course that maybe doesn't fit the guidelines or is, does fit the guidelines, but you might not see that at face value, so you'll have a record for why you've included that.
Okay. Well, now on to writing, which looks a bit different. So what we found in the data is that most institutions are using English 1301 or 1302 as the first college level course in writing. And so that's typically going to be the case. But institutions may use courses in literature. Well, I'm skipping ahead. So other courses can be used if they have at least 30% of the course grade based on student writing. And now, I know our stakeholder group considered a lot of different options for the criteria in writing, and this is the one they found the least burdensome, that word counts. And I know they talked about word counts, but the decision is that would be really hard. I mean, that would take a lot more to implement. So the final recommendation from that group was to use a percentage, that basically 30% of the course or more was based on student writing. And again, like the reading, 3 semester credit hours, and there should be a TSI requirement in writing. So here you can see that English 1301 and 1302 always count. And then other courses in literature or history will count if they meet the course criteria and general requirements. And you don't need to keep any real documentation. We're not really advising that. You just need to do a review. Courses that are specifically not recommended are creative writing, foreign language, or again, learning frameworks courses. And then, as with the reading, if there are courses that you would like to use that are not on the list, you can look at your course criteria. Okay. And now the math. So in the math, I think it's there are two types of programs that we had to look at to consider the guidelines for math. So we have academic associate or baccalaureate degrees and other associate degrees, and level 2 certificates where math is a requirement. Okay, and then we have other cases where in the applied associate degrees or level 2 certificates where math is not required. And so we've got separate guidelines for each of these cases. In both cases, students have to meet TSI in math. Okay, but what they actually take as part of their program differs.
And if I can just interject something here, because I actually had the pleasure of working with the math group on first college level courses and really enjoyed working with that group. If you go back to the prior slide, we provided some misinformation. We had a little bit of confusion related to the math requirement for some level 2 certificates. And when we did the webinar in February, we were under the under the understanding that all students in a level 2 certificate had to do some kind of math or science general requirement, and that is not the case, and that was pointed out to us, and I wanted to make sure that everyone listening in, and those of you who are aware that we have corrected that in the material. That's why the part on the bottom right is highlighted in yellow, that there are, as Jana pointed out, we have some situations where students are not required to take an academic math or natural science course as part of their program. So we did go ahead and address that in the guidelines, and Jana will be talking about that. So my apologies that we did have a little bit of misinformation there, but this is, I believe, accurate now, unless we haven't characterized it correctly now. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so the first case, when a math course is required for the program, general requirements are 3 semester credit hours and a TSI requirement in math. And the recommended courses are all 1,000 and 2,000 level ACGM math courses, as well as statistics courses, including Psych 2317 and University Lower Division Statistics courses in the areas of social studies, economics, and business, and University Lower Division Quantitative Analysis courses. And then courses that are not recommended, unlike the others, it's any that's not listed here. Okay, and in the case where math is not required for the program, again, the course will have to be a 3 semester credit hour course, but it's any of the courses recommended when math is required. So any of the courses that we've already talked about, those will count. But in addition, a math or natural science course that fulfills the program requirements. And so in general, we recommend that a course report, an institution report a math course over a science course, and a physical science course over a biological science course. But that's just a general recommendation. In addition, any of the following WECM technical math courses are allowed. And you can see those 4 listed, and then courses not recommended are those not on the list. And then for students seeking a Level 2 certificate where no math or science is required, if the students take any of the courses listed above, they can be reported as completing a first college level course in math. And I think the idea of reporting a science course, that's been what university or what institutions have been doing when math was not required for the program. That's what most institutions have already been doing all along. And I think that's the end of the first college level course presentation. Are there any questions?
Yes. Just a cautionary note really to all of us. Since this is related to funding, any justifications for those not on the list, I would suggest the institutions are going to have to be pretty adept at having some good justification, since it's going to be tied to funding.
Okay.
Thank you. And as I said before, it is up to the institutions to keep that. It's a guideline. It's a suggestion that documentation be kept. But I think your point is taken by the folks who are here. I want to add one other thing, and it's these slides are sort of the big picture. But one other point that we have had questions about when we talk about that TSI is a requirement, that TSI is a requirement for the class. For example, something like college algebra, you may have a student in that class who hadn't met TSI upon entry because it's part of a co-requisite or paired course model. If the student successfully completes that course, they can be reported as having passed a first college level course even though they weren't TSI met coming in. So when we say TSI as a requirement, we mean don't pick a course that students don't have to have, no one has to have TSI to get into that course, because to go back to the origins of these guidelines, it relates to our developmental education measures, and have students who completed DE and been TSI met, have they been able to go on to a first college level course and be successful? So again, when you see that TSI required, that's for the course, that generally it's it's a course where students are expected to have met TSI, but if you have a student entering it who hasn't met, who's done a paired course, in a paired course situation or something like that, it's totally appropriate when the student is successful to report them. And I think that's clear in the guidelines, but I just wanted to be sure everyone understood that, because we have had that question asked. And we did do a little bit of tweaking on the actual guidelines to try to make sure that's very clear.
Any other questions?
And I just want to take the opportunity to thank Jana, because she really did an excellent job. It was a big project to take this on and work with so many stakeholders, and we had a lot of issues come up related to this. And I think we ended up with some guidelines that are very clear, straightforward. Not too complex, but do the job. So I wanted to, and again, they're voluntary. I should say we ended up with some voluntary guidelines, but I think we did this at the request of institutions, and some of that I think was a result of Success Points. People really wanted some help with this, so I want to commend you for the work that you did and for putting this together. And I hope you all find these guidelines useful.
And I'd really like to say thank you to our stakeholder group as well. I mean, they all came here for the first meeting. So they put a lot of work into this.
Ditto.
We just have one more item on our agenda before we break for lunch, and I think it's a fairly quick one.
There's no presentation on it, but it's a DE ESOL reading and writing. We had one institution that contacted us to ask about, they wanted to create an integrated ESOL, integrated reading and writing course specifically, and there is no SIP code for that at this point. And so what we've recommended is that institutions, if they do offer a true integrated reading and writing for ESOL, English for Speakers of Other Languages, to use one of the existing SIPs as seems best for the course that you're offering, and then the program staff in DE are going to take a look at this further to see if they want to develop an actual integrated reading and writing ESOL course. So if you have questions about that, feel free to contact me.
Great. Well, we will take our lunch recess now. Food is on its way down. If Sue, she may already be here in the back doing her magic. But anyway, she'll be bringing the food out in just a minute. So for those of you who are dialing in, we will be back online at 1 p.m. You're welcome to leave the call and dial back in later, or you can listen to our conversations over at the speakers if they get caught on them.
That might not be the best. No, we'll go ahead, and I think, are we able to shut the phone? We'll shut them down and get everything started again at 1.
Okay. Thank you for dialing in, and we'll see you soon. Tuning in, if you're watching us online or dialing in. Something worth saying is worth repeating. And thank you for those of you here who stayed. Yay! The second half of the meeting will be, again, focusing on updates, but we've invited several of our colleagues from other areas in our division, and I would like to invite Dr. Rex Peebles to the front. Yes, please come up here and bring your name with you. Dr. Peebles joined us a few months ago. He is the assistant Commissioner for Workforce, Academic Affairs, and Research, affectionately known as WAR. What is it good for? And here he's going to tell you.
But not the Great War. Yeah, she just said there. What did you say? Some things worth saying are worth repeating. So everything I'm about to say is probably not worth repeating. But
Where are you going? Well, are you sure? Yep, absolutely sure.
If you're joining us through the telephone, please be sure to put us on mute. Please do not place us on hold. You can also use *6 to mute yourselves because we can hear you.
I know. Okay.
yeah, you're having a far more interesting conversation than we are.
Okay, let me find this link again.
We can still hear you.
Somebody had all these emails. Okay.
Well, they just need to speak up.
And I don't know that I need to.
Okay, yeah, we are still hearing some folks talking in the background, so if you are listening in on the Community and Technical College Accountability Meeting, please be sure your phone is on mute. Again, we are still hearing folks' voices. Oh, I think maybe you just realized. Silence is golden.
Maybe so.
Thank you.
Thank you. I had no idea that was a record.
Or maybe not.
I've seen his name a lot, and I think he used to be in IR for a while. And I never.
No, we're still hearing voices. If you're listening in on the accountability meeting, I think we need you to mute your phones.
Maybe I got him mixed up. I sent an email over lunch to my vet of my chicken, one of my chickens, and I had to take a picture of her chicken derriere and send it over to the vet. I've never done that before, but I don't have time to go over there and visit and talk, I don't know if they're going to think it's like a prank email or what kind of pornography.
Sue is on her way down.
But I hope they respond.
All right. Well, we will carry on as best we can. But if I'll try to stop if we hear something really interesting coming in on the other line. Okay, so I'm supposed to give you a little update from Workforce, Academic Affairs, and Research, as Ginger said, otherwise known as WAR, which I've always found kind of interesting. I didn't think that up myself. Somebody else sat up all night and kept rearranging those letters until they came up with WAR. So, okay. But I will talk about 4 things that have occurred or in the process of occurring that you might be interested in, especially from the accountability point of view and from your own institutional point of view. And the first I'll mention is the core curriculum. We have approved 88 core curriculums from around the state. And I guess in some ways I've told people that one of the, and I'm not really sure this is irony or not, but maybe it is. One of the ironies of my career is having served on the Undergraduate Education Advisory Committee for 6 years or so, and the last 2 of which, of that 6 years, I co-chaired and helped finalize the new core curriculum that takes effect in fall of 2014. And my actual last official duty at Midland College before I left there was to submit Midland College's core curriculum to the coordinating board. And then I got to come to the coordinating board and approve it, which was kind of interesting, and along with 87 other core curriculums. And we've worked our way through some glitches and some probably a little bit of trial and tribulation with a good number of those 88 institutions. But we're almost finished with that process, and I would still argue that if we do with the core curriculum what I believe the UEAC's intention was, and that is to try to make sure that students, when they finish the core and they exit their institution, whether it be a 2 or a 4-year school, they actually take with them the skills and knowledge that's embedded in those core courses and in those core objectives, and then we will have made better students, better citizens, better employees, and just hopefully better people. But we're still working our way through a little bit of that. There's been some questions about the reporting of some of this, and we're looking at ways to perhaps transcript and report the 090, the component area option, that will give more information to receiving institutions about just what that 090 did for the student and what core objectives they got. So we're looking at some of those issues, and we hope to have some of that ironed out by next year. Next year we'll go to a process where people will be able to revise their core once a year. And we've already started discussing how we'll receive submissions and then review those, and then try to have a formal sort of an appeals process, if you will, where institutions will be able to come back and say, well, you denied this, why? What do we need to do to fix it? Or what have we already done that you overlooked, or that we didn't send you, or whatever the case may be. So we're also going to try to make that a little bit user-friendlier process than we had this time around. I think it's important to remember that while the 88 institutions went through the process of creating a new core, the coordinating board staff also went through the process of creating a new core. And so both sides got to learn a lot about how this is supposed to work. The other thing I want to mention, or one other thing I want to mention too, is the 60-hour rule, which I kind of hesitate to call the 60-hour rule because it really should be the 60-hour statute. This was not something that the coordinating board dreamed up on its own. This is something the legislature passed. But as one of my colleagues pointed out earlier in the day, once the legislature had passed a 120-hour rule for 4-year schools, then we all should have seen the 60-hour rule coming for 2-year schools. It was probably just a matter of time before it showed up. And now it has shown up, and that will be effective in fall of 2015. So one of the little wrinkles in this is that the legislation and coordinating board rule allows for institutions to seek exemptions to the 60-hour rule based on compelling academic reasons. And then the coordinating board gets the great joy of trying to determine what a compelling academic reason is. And we've had a lot of internal discussions about this, and we will have a lot more before we get to that stage. And one of the things that we have done is we've sent every institution a spreadsheet to identify those programs that they're going to take to 60 hours, to identify those programs for which they wish to seek an exemption and why. And one of the things that we'll be looking at is the reasons that you guys submit to us for doing this, and are there patterns in those reasons? Is there some program or programs that seem to consistently show up and are identified by a number of institutions as needing more than 60 hours? So there's still a lot of work ahead of this, and trust me, there is no predetermined notion of what a compelling academic reason is. You know, if you ask me, I can probably give you some vague idea of what I think a compelling academic reason might look like, but it may also be very well one of those things that turns out a lot like, you know, the old saying about pornography, and that is nobody knows really how to define it, but we all know it when we see it, kind of thing. And so I think as we work our way through this, then as we see what people consider to be compelling academic reasons, and we get some kind of feedback from the field and get some institutional take on what this is, then we'll be able to actually make some determination based on that about what compelling academic reasons really are. So none of this has been set in stone, and that'll be a process that'll probably take several months to iron out completely. But again, that takes effect in fall of 2015. For those of you in reporting and that kind of thing, I have been asked the great question about, you get to, with WECM and the ACGM, you get to play with lecture hours versus contact hours. And so the law does not address the issue of total number of contact hours in a degree. It only addresses the issue of total number of semester credit hours in a degree. Okay. So enough said about that. Okay. All right. Another thing is the CTCLC. And so if anybody knows what that stands for, you can raise your hand and tell me. No, I'm kidding. I actually asked before I came down here what that stood for. The CTCLC, unfortunately, it's not like UEAC or something where you can make something else out of it. It is the Community and Technical College Leadership Council. And one of the things that's been formed over the past year is this Council of Community and Technical Colleges that is made up of half presidents or chancellors of community colleges, and the other half is members of boards of trustees of community colleges or the technical colleges. And that particular body was formed to provide some recommendations and advice to the coordinating board on issues that deal with community colleges and technical colleges. And I think it's important for you guys to know about this, particularly because that group is new and they're in the process of trying to define themselves and really trying to define what kind of issues, concerns, and problems that they have that they want to address and to try to give us some feedback on. And so since it's still very much in its formative stage and they're still, in a lot of ways, still trying to figure out exactly what it is that they want to look at over the next year, then you may have some influence in helping to determine what they look at over the next year. But it's now a standing committee of the coordinating board, and it has rotating membership. And again, it's half presidents or chancellors and half members of boards of trustees. So it'll be a kind of an interesting perspective, I guess, especially from trustees, which is a general rule we don't hear from a lot. So that's been very interesting because their take on things can be very different than the president's take, which can be very different than the faculty or staff's take. So you might want to keep an eye on that. And then the last thing I'll mention is a couple of studies that are underway at the coordinating board that deal with bachelor's degrees at community colleges. The RAND Corporation is conducting a study to determine the feasibility and advisability of community colleges offering bachelor's degrees. And it's really one study, I guess, but it's kind of split into, or actually I guess it's really two studies, isn't it?
Yeah, and actually I spoke a little bit about that earlier today, but I'm sure they'd be happy to hear your perspective on it.
Yeah, it's interesting to me because it's divided into this. Nursing is always a big issue, and as I told the meeting at Acctby the other day, my own personal take on this is that what's coming out of it a lot is that the problem with nursing is not that we don't have enough programs. The problem with nursing is we don't have enough faculty to teach in the program, to teach in the programs that we do have or in programs that we might want to have, and we don't have enough clinical sites to place students at anyway. And so the idea of we're going to solve this problem by creating more programs, whether at 4-year schools or 2-year schools or somewhere in between, I'm not sure is actually going to address the fundamental issue. And so there's one of the things that my division has done is we actually have a request for applications out now with nursing schools to take a long look at the whole notion of clinical hours. and to try to make some recommendations about what an appropriate number of clinical hours are, but also the appropriate mix between clinical hours at a sort of real clinical hours versus simulated clinical hours. And how much can you use simulation to take the place of clinicals at a hospital, for example, and to try to use it to address some of the issue that we face with clinicals. And then it occurs to me that something else that we probably ought to look at is some kind of incentive program of some sort to try to increase the number of nurse educators, so that if we can solve the clinical problem in some way, then we may be able to have enough nurse educators to also solve the faculty problem in some way. And then before those of us who are baby boomers all die off due to lack of medical attention, we can actually address the shortage of nurses, for example. So some of us have real self-interest involved in this whole thing. But the studies it's very interesting because, we don't always get the answers that we expect. And, the study was to look at the viability of offering and feasibility of offering bachelor degree nursing programs at community colleges. And as it turns out, that may not actually be the real problem that we have. And that even if we allowed that, it's not going to go very far toward actually solving the issue of a nursing shortage in the state of Texas. And then the other looks at technical programs. And again, my personal take on this and where the study is at is that it's kind of identifying what, in a lot of ways, it's sort of confirming what I've thought all along, and that is that applied bachelor's degrees at community colleges, that there is indeed a niche out there for them. Perhaps maybe not in all programs in all locations, but I do think that there may be places out there where applied science bachelor's degrees offered by community colleges can fill industry needs and thereby also fulfilling student needs as well. And so that's a little more interesting, and they've focused on 4 areas to look at. And one of them, I think, one of them is fire science, and I think it may be the classic example of a place where you actually have this sort of niche market out there for people who are in fire departments who have that associate of applied science degree in fire science, but they're looking to move up into management, or they're looking to move up into being fire marshals and actually investigating fires and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of career opportunity for them within fire departments, and those kind of degrees may provide the kind of pathway that they need without having to go back to another 4-year institution or a 4-year institution and perhaps getting a degree in something that is close but not quite what they're looking for to help them. So it'll be interesting to see how this comes out, and I think Julie probably already mentioned that the report will be presented to the board next week. Right?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, and so it might be worth your while to listen to that. Okay, and if there's anything else, I forget what it is. So if you have any questions, I'll be glad to try to answer them. And if you don't, that's even better. Soon. Go ahead.
I don't have a question, but going back to the nursing baccalaureate, what we're finding here in Austin area, and I'm sure it's happening elsewhere, but a lot of the hospitals are starting to require baccalaureate degrees for nursing. And so that creates a situation where the community college programs with ADNs or associate degree in nursing is not going to be qualifying our graduates for these jobs at these hospitals. So it's more than just a niche, I think. Well, it depends on how you find niche. But I think the industry is kind of forcing us to look more at the baccalaureate degrees. I'm not speaking for my institution specifically, but just looking at the trend out there. I've got a daughter that just graduated with an associate degree in nursing, and in looking for jobs, a lot of them are looking for the BSN.
Yeah, to the extent that particularly hospitals have decided to pursue magnet status, which says that all of their nurses should be bachelor's degree prepared, or 80% of them rather should be bachelor's degree prepared by a certain time. So what is happening is that a lot of them are trying to look for bachelor's degree nurses. A lot of them are not finding them. So they are hiring ADNs and then giving them like 5 years to get a bachelor's degree. So there's really two different approaches to that. And one is, as we all know, they're ADN programs. They're oftentimes, or what's called the generic nursing program, which is you just go into a bachelor's degree nursing program, you study 4 years or whatever, and you exit with a bachelor's degree and then set for the same exam that the ADN set for. And then the other is the RN to BSN, okay, or the ADN to BSN, the transition programs, as they're usually referred to. And those have become more and more popular, but it also turns out that there is a fair amount of, which I find kind of interesting, but it turns out that there may be a fair amount of excess capacity in the state already for RN to BSN programs. Now, whether they're in the right place at the right time is an issue that would have to be looked at. And so that, it does kind of add a different wrinkle to the original idea behind the study. It's quite true.
And the report, the draft report, which will be available, as we said, in a few weeks, it does specifically address some of those concerns. I think that the folks from RAND who were going around the state and talking with stakeholders had absolutely heard, similar comments related to the 80% situation and some of the nuances that involves in terms of these programs. So there is material in that report related to that.
Dr. Peebles, you mentioned and didn't elaborate on the AAS degrees where Career Tech may be addressing the 60-hour limit by choosing the maximum number of contact hours and courses. I know that we've had some people in our district saying that they've been at Career Tech meetings where that's being discussed a lot. I know you didn't go into it, but can you elaborate a little bit about where you see generally all of us going in that direction?
Well, I'm not sure where I see. Well, actually, what I do see is, I think people will take a look at lecture lab combinations and the range of hours that you have available to you for contact hours. And while you can take a course that may be currently 4 semester credit hours and reduce it to 3 semester credit hours, but you can actually increase the contact hours or keep the contact hours at the same level by increasing the number of lab hours. And I think there will be some of that, and some of that may be quite legitimate to do, by the way. One of the things that I'm a little bit concerned about is some of the range that we have, because I do find it sort of puzzling sometimes that you can take a course that in one institution may be 48 contact hours and another institution may be 96 because of the lecture lab combinations that they've got on it. And so the question I would have is that really the same course then? And I think that particularly in workforce, there was a time when we didn't worry too much about transfer in workforce because you're talking about sometimes a semester-long program, a year-long program, maybe 2 years at most. And so there was always that kind of assumption that students would stay in one place and finish there. And I think what we're seeing is that more and more students are also transferring in workforce programs too, because they move due to jobs and family issues and so forth. Now, that what is commonly referred to as swirling, and that's the notion of going from a 2-year to a 4-year to another 4-year back to a 2-year, or a 4-year to a 2-year back to a 4-year. That occurs much more often for folks who are seeking bachelors of arts and bachelors of science degrees. But I think we do tend to see this a little bit more than we used to among associate of applied science degrees. And so, over time, I think it's one of those issues that CTE in Texas really needs to kind of take a hard look at, in terms of do we need a little bit more commonality to ease that. Before I left my previous institution, I was really struck by a student who was trying to transfer from an institution, health science program, was trying to transfer from an institution 20 miles away to my institution. And even though both programs had the same endpoint in mind, and in a lot of ways had the same courses, the timing and the sequence was off, such that student was almost going to have to start over in order to finish a 2-year degree. And that really struck me as being kind of absurd. And it's not because either one of those institutions intentionally set out to make it that way by any means. I mean, nobody intentionally was doing this. It's just that nobody ever talked to anybody else about it. And so that may be one of those things where we need to have some conversation about that. Programs of study may help deal with this issue to a great extent, I think, as those roll out and so forth. And then I think WECM itself, one of the things we need to do is probably refocus WECM a little bit from almost strictly a focus on the courses to also some focus on the program itself, particularly as we tie it into programs of study, and just kind of draw that linkage a little bit closer together.
Just as a add-on to that, or a response, I serve on the WECM Leadership Committee, and this coming summer will be the 4th year that WECM workshops will have been conducted under the concept of courses being reviewed by SIP codes. And those SIP codes are in programs of study areas based on career clusters. And so actually the WECM Leadership Committee for 4 years now has been focused on trying to draw that relationship between courses, individual courses, because the actual workshop itself is specifically to review the currency and the effectiveness of individual courses. But we know in career and technical education that courses don't exist in and of themselves. They exist within the context of a program. And so, Rex, you're exactly correct that I think that's what we're trying to do from the leadership. But again, one of the bedrock protocols for WECM is that it's those faculty who are the content experts who come into the workshops who actually do the review and the recommendations for what that course needs to look like. So that we have to be somewhat careful not to arbitrarily, administratively constrain something when we are not necessarily the experts. But having said that, I think that there is a desire to make sure that we look at those credit and contact hour ranges to ensure that there is consistency and transferability.
Rex, in regard to the core curriculum, do you anticipate that we will have another portal submission similar to what we did for the original when we submit changes in the fall?
Yes. And we've started talking about how we can take the portal that was created for the original submission and then make whatever changes we need to it to also make it available for the revisions as well. So, yeah, instead of a straightforward paper kind of thing with also the same sort of response. The big difference would be that we hope to build in some kind of formal review and appeal process for that, which we didn't have with the original submissions, and so then we've kind of wound up sort of ad hocing this as we've gone along. And one of the things that I, what I told the staff about this was that I didn't want to open it up so that everybody could appeal every course they had that was denied. Because as somebody here at the agency pointed out to me, there are 88 institutions and you got a handful of staff. And so, we had to try to deal with this as best we could, while at the same time not overwhelming ourselves, but also trying to serve institutions. So essentially what we looked at were those things that two instances. One is there were some institutions that, because there were courses denied, they actually wound up with a less than 42-hour core curriculum. And that's basically illegal. And, this is one of those things that before I came to the coordinating board, I wouldn't have been bothered by that in the least. But now I have a responsibility to make sure that we're actually legal. And so one of the things that we looked at was those institutions that wound up with less than 42-hour core, and how do we help them have a 42-hour core. And then the other was those things that seemed to be, when we defined the term as sort of mission critical, but in those places where it looked like that by students not having certain choices, they could be, their paths to success could be, it could be detrimental to their achieving what they needed to achieve. So we also tried to look at those kinds of issues as well. And that's led to some backing up and other stuff. And then there were technical glitches, and there were colleges that pushed the wrong button, and there was coordinating staff that pushed the wrong button, and so those things, or didn't push the right button, which I think I did that once. And I'm not sure that pushing the wrong button or failing to push the right button, either one's probably just as bad. So there were some technical glitches and stuff that we on both ends, both at the institutional level and at the coordinating board level, that we also dealt with. But again, part of what I tried to do was not simply open it up to allowing everybody to appeal every course that was denied. If we'd done that, and probably no one would have had a core curriculum by fall of 2014. So.
The second part of that, Rex, is do you anticipate change in physical science from 6 hours, since most of us have 4-hour science courses, and then we could go to a 44-hour core? Has any consideration been given to that?
Not lately. There was some discussion of that in UEAC when the core was put together. And it's kind of in a lot of ways, that's kind of a mixed bag. There are a lot of institutions that have 4-hour science courses. There are a number of institutions that have 3-hour science courses who, which side do you compel to go one way or the other? In some ways we tried to split the difference, so to speak, as best we could by allowing institutions to either place the 2 hours of lab science in the core or simply account for it in their degree plans. Somehow there has also been some discussion at different times about how to deal with the semester credit hours and have everybody go to 3-hour courses with more lab hours for science majors and perhaps less lab hours for non-science majors. That puts a big strain on facilities, but then there are people who would argue, well, what about virtual labs? For every problem, there's 2 or more solutions, and sometimes there's a good solution in there somewhere. So it has been discussed, and but I don't know that there's a good answer to that, because I think this is one of those things where when you solve the problem for one institution, you create another problem for another institution as a result. And if it's something that people, in the field really think that it's important enough that we should revisit again, then we can do that again through UEAC and have them take a look at it. I will say that there was I think it was UEAC that looked at the idea of 3 semester credit hour science classes. In other words, doing away with 4 semester credit hour science classes and going to all 3-hour semester credit hour classes, and that recommendation was, I think, pretty much unanimously rejected. So. I hope that was a sufficiently vague non-answer. All right, anybody else? Any other questions or comments for me? All right, thank you.
Thank you, Rex. I'd like to invite Terry Daniels up. She is from P16, and she's going to give us an update on TSI, the TSI assessment. Welcome, Terry.
Good afternoon. I know you guys with TSI and developmental education, we're all thinking, did the world go crazy? It's a little different than what it looked like a few years back. I am going to give you an update on some of the rules that are currently in practice. They're effective already. We're going to talk a little bit about the new TSI instrument, and then some of the proposed rules that will happen as a result of the TSI, of the proposed rules of the new TSI assessment. I want to also tell you that if you've been doing anything with DevEd lately, you know that we don't have all the answers. I get questions and phone calls all the time. So how do we do this? How do we implement this practice? How do we report this? And what does this look like on our campus? And so I will tell you from the beginning that we don't have all of the answers. We need boots on the ground to help us figure out some of these practices, some of the rules that we've put into play. And as we go through and talk about, as you're working with individuals on your campus who are program staff who are coming to you saying, okay, how do I track this? We're going to be doing this new practice, but how do we track this? So your feedback on what is working, what's not working is very important to us. So we're going to go ahead and talk about some of the new rules, and I will give you some of the things, some of the questions that we've encountered in the field already based upon some of these rules. First, the new TSI exemption. There is now an exemption for students who demonstrate limited English proficiency. This is the ESOL waiver, and it was effective in November of 2013. And we found that there were as we were doing the learning outcomes that are now in the ACGM for the ESOL courses, there were a lot of different opinions on how ESOL was offered at institutions of higher ed, how it was tracked. And we thought, okay, well, if we have this waiver in place for students with the ESOL, that may address some of the issues. One of the questions that we've had recently about the ESOL waiver is, when do you implement it? When do we apply this to the student? And how is that captured in reporting? Well, the ESOL waiver, you can implement that if a student comes in and an advisor, counselor, whomever's talking to them can immediately tell there may be some language barriers there, then you can implement the ESOL waiver. Some institutions said, so what happens if we don't really understand that there's a limited English proficiency until after the student has taken the TSI? You can still go and apply the ESOL waiver, but it's going to create the same situation because the student is likely going to test into developmental education based upon the assessment instrument. So you're already going to have them labeled DevEd. So the ESOL waiver is not going to change that situation any. So that's one thing to remember with the ESOL waiver. Second thing, important thing to remember, is that the DE hours for the community college, those 27 hours limit for developmental education, they still apply with the ESOL waiver. So the student may actually have the waiver, but those DE hours are still ticking away. One of the other things to remember with the ESOL waiver is that if you implement or you apply the waiver at the very beginning, the student will have to take the TSI assessment after completing 15 credit hours or prior to enrolling into that first level credit-bearing course. So the ESOL waiver, we had a question, just Friday I had a question. So could a student have an ESOL waiver and then enroll in a credit-bearing course? No, the student would have to have the TSI prior to enrolling into that credit-bearing course. So the ESOL waiver doesn't allow, it's not a workaround for the student to get into the credit-bearing course. It's really for those students who have demonstrated English language proficiency, is that they're not forced to take the TSI immediately, because you recognize it early on that there's an English language proficiency. The next one, pre-assessment activity. This has been a big one. We all know that it's important that students not go in and take the test cold turkey, that they understand what are some of the implications of taking the pre-assessment activity. And so all students who are not exempt, they either have met an SAT, ACT, TAKS, so any student not exempt must take the pre-assessment activity. And it shows here some of the components that must be included in the pre-assessment activity. Students must understand the importance of the test. They must understand developmental education and also some of the support services that are offered on campus. Currently, the coordinating board is not requiring that the pre-assessment activity be reported to us. It's not on any of the CBM reports. It's not we ask questions about it on the DEPs, but it's not a tracking mechanism on the DEP. However, although we're not collecting that information, the institutions are responsible for keeping a record of the students who take the pre-assessment activity on their campus. So you will not, at this time, you're not submitting that information to the coordinating board, but you are still capturing it on your campus. There are some different class requirements for the different classification of students, dual credit students. A lot of the testing sites, or the ISDs, are independent testing sites. That means that they are not under the umbrella of your institution of higher ed. So they're administering that test on their campus. However, if they are your feeder institution, it is still up to you to make sure that that pre-assessment activity is administered. The institutions can work with you and use your pre-assessment activity, but they must still administer it. With transfer students, the receiving institution, it is not your responsibility to track the pre-assessment activity. It's up to the institution where the student tested to have that information on record. So the receiving institution does not have to track that down. You can, if the student goes in to either, if they're taking the TSI, you can assume that they've had the pre-assessment activity already, or if they're enrolling in directly into DevEd courses, you don't have to go back and verify that they've had the pre-assessment activity. For out-of-state students, however, the receiving institution must ensure that the pre-assessment activity has been administered.
And can I just add something short to that? This would also apply to students coming from independent colleges in Texas if they're transferring in, but it is not going to apply for out-of-state students or students coming from independent colleges where you have reviewed their transcript and determined that they're already TSI ready. So obviously this is just for the students who come in who it's determined that testing is required under TSI. Thanks.
Thanks, Julie. The next one is probably the most difficult thing to actually track and to report: holistic placement. We wanted to allow some flexibility, not just relying on the assessment instrument to place students, but how do you track holistic placement? What indicators do you look for with the holistic placement? And again, this is a difficult one. This is new. It's a new measurement that we're using, and so we're relying on the institutions to establish, so what does holistic placement look like on your campus, and how do you enforce it on your campus? It may be a common practice that you establish a uniform method of doing holistic placement, or it may be that it is customized and individualized to the student, which is going to require more time on behalf of your advisors and counselors to do placement, but it is something, again, that we're looking at how do we track holistic placement? And I wanted to stress here that institutions have the authority to do the holistic placement, but you have to have some documentation on why you made the decision that you made. If you're relying strictly on the placement score, the threshold cut score to do the holistic placement, just having something that is a policy that you could share, that we've decided that students this many points below the college ready, we're going to mainstream, but just having some documentation on how it is that you're doing the holistic placement. Evaluation and reporting. Again, this goes back to currently we're capturing some information on the CBM reports. We're also capturing some information on the Developmental Education Program Survey. But oftentimes the individuals who complete the Developmental Education Program Survey aren't always aware of all of the reporting requirements and the things that go on behind the scenes. So it's a great time to talk about the information that you're reporting on DEPS. This is how you actually capture that. This is how it's being tracked and reported back to the coordinating board on our reports. So actually talking and having some conversations on your campus in regards to the reporting that happens for developmental education in regards to the program survey and the reporting that happens for developmental education that goes through the CBM reports. There were the several components, program components that we added to rules back in August of 2012. These were program components that were happening in developmental education prior to us putting this into rules. These were all things that all of the campuses were doing. They were promising best practices, and so we just actually added them into the rules in 2012. But again, this is how do you capture this? In reporting, how do you capture differentiated placement and instruction? So we're going to be working with the campuses through some of our grants here at the coordinating board and also through the Developmental Education Program Survey to see how do we capture that. And we'll be working with the P16 group to see what is there something that we need to add to reporting, or is there something that some more easier way that we can capture this information.
Yes, and we have talked in planning, and Jana, who presented earlier on the first college level courses, she is now working directly. She works with DE data as well very closely, and we've been looking at the CBM manual, specifically the 2 and the S, where we collect information on developmental education. We've had some folks in the field come to us with some interventions that don't quite fit the way that we're reporting in terms of some different areas, and so we have determined that we need to go back and take a look, think about holistic reporting, whether we need to be capturing, if someone, obviously holistic reporting is important for placement, and what's the best, if a student needs DE, what's the best DE program to put them in, but also we could have situations where institutions are determining that students are ready for college level coursework based on holistic placement, and some of this we feel like it's going to be important to capture through the CBM manual, some of these things, and not through the DEPS, for example, if that type of placement where someone's been determined to be ready for the college level coursework. For example, we have a situation now where if an institution reports a student with a test score where they didn't meet a standard and then they report them as first ready, those types of things we have edits built in, and they'll be questionable or errors. So we want to make sure that we have the system in place for the manuals that fits the current world that we're living in terms of developmental education, which is a whole different world than back in 2009 when the CBM 002 was revised, and in 11 when the CBM 00S came in. So we've had so many changes so quickly. So you'll be seeing some things come to you from us related to this, as well as some things coming to you on the DEPS and through the P16 folks. Yes.
Question regarding the holistic placement. Mm-hmm. Can just a score range be used as far as cutoff, or do we need to use one of the additional factors listed in that ruling there?
If you just use the score range, because we now have the new diagnostic piece to the assessment instrument, that would, if you didn't have anything else, as long as you were looking at that diagnostic, we have on there that you have to use one other indicator, so you'll have some additional information as backup. And right now, since we haven't had the test validated, I would definitely encourage in using at least one other indicator. But once we have the TSI assessment, we've had it validated and you're able to use the diagnostic profile, an institution may find that they're getting so much information from that diagnostic profile that they could use the CUT score and the diagnostic profile for the assessment instrument to do the holistic placement.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And on the program components, there were 2 components that we put into rules and established timelines for when they have to be in place on the campus. The first one is the IRW, Integrated Reading and Writing at the highest level. And that has to be in place. I think we've previously talked about having that in place by spring 2014. But when we put it into rules, we said just to align all of the new program components, it has to be in place by spring 2015. So we're doing professional development now. We started last year. But the integrated reading and writing at the highest level has to be integrated by spring 2015. And the next one is the non-core space. We've been working on non-core space for a couple of years now, trying to figure out how do we report non-core space interventions and what does that look like. We're very good saying what it's not, but it's kind of difficult to establish a definition for non-core space interventions. But we've been working with institutions for the past couple of years, and now non-core space interventions must be offered in each section of developmental education by spring of 2015. And now that was the completion of the changes that were in the rules, all effective through 2012, from 2012 through the latter part of 2013. Now we're going to talk about the new TSI assessment, and this has been an interesting time and a fun time. Before, the assessment instrument had the students designated either as college ready or not college ready. Well, now we have 3 classifications for the test. We have college ready, developmental education, and adult basic education. In addition to the threshold set, or what we commonly refer to as the CUT score, we now also have diagnostic profiles on the new assessment instrument, which provides additional information on a student's strengths and or weaknesses. And that's information that we're able to use. On the ABE, the diagnostic is divided into developmental education and into adult basic education. So a student could take either diagnostic, either the one for developmental education or the one for adult basic education. And I know you don't want me to go into the details on the assessment, but I will just very quickly give you a brief overview of how that works. The student goes in, they've had the pre-assessment activity. They take the first part of the test, it's 20 questions, and that establishes that placement score, 310 to 390. If the student is not deemed college ready based upon those CUT scores, then the test will go into either a Dev Ed diagnostic, and then we have the CUT scores for DE, which sets the bottom. If the student does not meet the CUT scores for DE, that test goes into the ABE diagnostic, in which they will have levels 1 through 6 as an additional piece of that diagnostic profile. Students who are testing into levels 5 and 6 are technically developmental education students and should be served in program work just as DE students. Our ABE students are considered those students who have met the ABE CUT score and have the levels 1 through 4. And what I'm about to talk about now is the TSI operational plan, which is a proposed instrument that the coordinating board developed to serve students who test into ABE. And one of the things that we've been doing, we took the TSI operational plan around the state. We did 10 regional meetings, and we vetted that through stakeholders to see, are these recommendations could they help us accomplish what we're trying to accomplish with more appropriate service of the students who are testing at the adult basic ed level. And so I'm going to go over the recommendations that would have a direct impact on institutions of higher ed. There are now 10 recommendations, and that's what we're going to take to the board on April the 24th. at the board meeting on the 24th. There are 10 recommendations. When we were doing the visits around the state, there were only 9. But after some of the feedback from the institutions, we decided that there was a 10th recommendation that should be added into the recommendation plan. That 10th recommendation is not going to be on the PowerPoint today because, again, I'm really only focusing on those that will have an impact on reporting and for you guys. The first one, we've already talked about. The goal of the TS operational plan is really to better serve students who are assessed at the basic skill level. Recommendation 1 was phase in of the implementation plan. The first thing you see up there is fall 2014, so you immediately think, okay, well, you're going to ask us to implement this in fall of 2014. No, we're not. What we're trying to do in fall of 2014 is to identify and select institutions to help us determine how is this going to be done? How do we change how we were serving students at the lower skill set, and what does it look like? And that includes what happens to how we report this information, what happens to how we enroll the students, and that's what's fall of 2014. We're looking to identify 10 institutions, maybe more, who can help us determine how do we serve students at the basic skill level. In fall 2015, what we're hoping to do is to identify some promising practices that institutions can implement within the current infrastructure to serve those students. And that's going to be institutions across the state effective in fall of 2015. We're going to be providing professional development that will actually begin this summer with working with advisors and looking at the new TSI diagnostic profile, but the professional development will continue even once we get to fall of 2015. If we still need to carry forward PD, we will continue to do that even after fall 2015, should we continue to get funding. Recommendation 2, serving students not high school complete. I think this has been one of the biggest issues. It goes back and forth because we have some who say that, no, we should not be serving students until they've completed a high school credential. And then there are some that say we have a large population that are coming in who don't have a high school diploma, but they're wanting to come in and just get some additional coursework, maybe for a promotion on a job. But what this recommendation here is that should a student not be high school complete, that we're recommending that student is not even administered the TSI assessment, that student would be referred to an organization to complete the GED, and then after that time, then they would be served by the institutions of higher education. And one of the things that we considered as far with this recommendation is that a student without a high school diploma is not going to be eligible for federal financial aid. And so that student could potentially be paying out of pocket if they have not established some other source of paying for coursework. So if they come to an institution of higher education and we can assist them in being able to receive federal aid, then that's something that we should consider doing. Recommendation 3, clarification and identification of terms. Developmental education we're all very familiar with because that has been our world prior to fall of 2013. But now we're looking at students who assess actually their skill level is below developmental education. And this proposal is just to identify coursework for those students and label and call that base coursework, basic academic skill education. And that's coursework for students who have actually assessed below developmental education. Recommendation 4, identify and develop base NCBOs. Okay, so now that we've established that we want to label this coursework something different, we've got to have a way to place it into the ACGM and establish learning outcomes for this coursework. And so recommendation 4 is establishing the base NCBOs, and we it is referred here intentionally to the base NCBOs because we're trying to move away from actually having students who are placed into a traditional level 16-week course and their skill set keeps them there for a long period of time. If we haven't been able to actually address their needs, there may be some paired coursing that could go on with the base NCBO and a workforce program. And so that's what we're looking at, those base NCBOs to actually serve as a supplement to maybe some other program that that the student could be enrolled in. If you have an adult ed program on your campus already, the student may actually be able to enroll in an adult ed program and then actually use the base NCBO if they're doing a transition. A lot of the adult ed programs have that transition component where the student is enrolling in higher ed. And so if that student is not quite ready for the credit-bearing course, but they're close, that NCBO could be used as transition work from the AEL program. Recommendation 6, advise and refer levels 1 and 2. These are the students who are testing at the lowest level of the assessment instrument. These are students with a skill set that's the grade equivalent of 0 to 3.9. They actually don't have a skill set at the 4th grade level in levels 1 and 2. The recommendation is that if a student assessed in levels 1 and 2 in all 3 subject areas, and again, I want to stress all 3 subject areas, that student would be referred to an organization that may be better equipped to address their needs. Because a student who's assessing at that level, there's a lot of intensive work that has to go on that may not be as readily available at the institution of higher education. So the recommendation is to refer students who assess at levels 1 and 2 in all 3 areas out to other organizations. All of this information, and I've come to the end, we have on the website the TSI operational plan with all of the recommendations and the rationale, the new rules for developmental education, the TSI statute. All of that information is available on the coordinating board's website /TSI. And I'm going to put our contact information up, but at this time, if you guys have any questions regarding some of the changes to developmental education or TSI or even the operational plan, again, that's going to be presented to the board on April the 24th, and then we will move forward with whatever their recommendation, or what the approval process from the board will move forward there with implementing the operational plan. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, on recommendation 2, you say that if a student doesn't have a GED or a high school diploma, they should not be assessed with TSI, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, we have a collegiate high school at my college. We have 450 juniors and seniors who are full-time college students, but they're also high school students.
Is this an early college high school program?
It's not early college. It is a collegiate high school. Richland College Collegiate High School.
Okay.
And every one of those students gets assessed with TSI, every one of them. And I'm just wondering how this is going to impact them, because they are full-time college students and they simultaneously earn high school credit and college credit, and at the end of 2 years, if they're successful, they graduate with a high school diploma and an associate's degree.
Okay. With the dual credit, if it's like a dual credit program or an early college high school, those students will still fall under the requirements of those programs of dual credit. We're talking about the student who comes directly to the door of an institution of higher ed, and they're not connected to any other programs, and they've come to the institution of higher ed to say, I want to enroll, and they don't have a high school diploma. Those students that you're referring to will continue to fall under either dual credit guidelines or if it's an early college high school, but we're just talking specifically about the student who comes to the institution of higher ed to enroll. And they're not participating in any other programs.
That makes perfect sense. Is there a way that will be made explicit in this recommendation going forward? Because even though we understand what you're saying right now, it's not the way it's worded in here. It says if they're not high school complete, they cannot take the test. And so we've been worried about the same thing for our early college, high school, and dual credit students.
Okay. I can make a note
if that
here.
Language could be put in there. That would really be helpful. Thank you. Okay.
Terry, I have a quick question about validating the TSIA. You mentioned the TSIA being validated. We have some concerns about the 350 on the math side. Could you describe who's responsible for validating the TSIA and how you plan on going about completing that validation process, and when we'll find out the results?
College Board is responsible for doing the validation study, and what they will look at is the actual scores for the students who were placed, and then they will look at the course level outcome. And they need a full fall semester before they could do that. So they're going to be collecting that information this fall, 2014, and what they have told us so that they can look at the course level data, they will have to have the spring, and then they will have that information ready for posting hopefully by November of 2015. And we've had some, I've talked with some other institutions that were concerned. This past Friday, I was doing reading and writing workshop in San Antonio, and they were also concerned about some of the students who were placing as college ready for reading and writing and in the English 1301, and they were concerned about that score, that cut score not being appropriate. And what I suggested or recommended to him is collect that information, that data from your institution already, because College Board has set that timeline for us. But if there's information that you can collect at your institution that would help, that's always information that we can use here at the coordinating board, and we can provide that information also to the College Board as they're looking at the data.
And as you know, we are collecting on the two students' test scores for the TSIA, and we do collect students' performance in all of their courses. So we will be able to provide data as well, and have some data for some of these analyses.
Other questions? Well, if there are no other questions, I thank you guys for your time. And again, the contact information for all of the DE staff is on the coordinating board website. And if you have questions or concerns that come up later, please feel free to contact us.
Thanks. I'm going to break in. Wait, Claudette, please do come up. I'm just going to break in for a minute because we did invite folks who were in enrollment manager or admission office roles to join us for the meeting from 2 to 3 for our discussion on closing the gaps. I want to tell those folks, if you did, I heard a few folks breaking in around 2, that if you did just join us, we're running a little bit late in terms of timing. I hope what we're discussing now will be of interest. We have a presentation now on HB5, and after that we will move into our discussion of closing the gaps. I've been informed that Judy Laredo is probably not going to be able to join us for that from our P16 section for the Closing the Gaps discussion because she is at the legislature in a hearing that has run over. So I think that segment is probably going to be a little shorter than we anticipated. We should get everyone out by 3. But again, I apologize to those folks who are just joining us that we're a little bit delayed in our timing, and we will get to that Closing the Gaps discussion. Thank you.
I'd like to welcome Claudette Jenks, who is also from P16, and she's going to give you an update on HB5, an update of what we know so far.
Yes, thank you, Ginger. I'm going to give you some updates on the relevant sections of that pertain to college readiness that passed out of this last legislative session. House Bill 5 did a couple of things. One, it replaced the recommended plan and to substitute to a new 22 credit foundation program. It created areas of endorsements, so career pathways essentially, and it developed a distinguished level of achievement. The intent of the bill is mainly to give students some flexibility in choosing pathways into higher education or the workforce. So there's a lot of opportunities now for students, and those endorsement areas are mainly so students can start exploring career options earlier in high school. So this slide just basically shows you what the foundation program looks like. I'm going to walk you through this as best that I can. This is going to be 4 credits, beginning in the fall actually. 9th grade students are going to fall under this program. So you have 4 credits of English language arts. You have English 1, 2, and 3, and an advanced English credit. This credit can be satisfied with a variety of different options. Students no longer have to take English 4. There's going to be several different options available to the students. And in the next few slides, I'm actually going to show you what some of these advanced credits are going to look like to give you an idea of what that is. Students now take 3 credits in math. Algebra 1 and geometry are required, and then there's an advanced math credit. You have 3 credits in science. Biology is required, as well as IPC or an advanced credit in science and another advanced science. And then you have, from the original recommended plan, you have the social studies has dropped down from 4 credits to 3 credits in social studies. You have 2 credits in language other than English. And the important thing here to note is that students typically were falling under the taking 2 of the same languages in foreign language. However, the bill is now allowing students to substitute 2 computer language courses to satisfy this requirement. You also have 1 credit each in fine arts and PE, and then 5 elective credits. The foundation program is now making students eligible for general admission to Texas public 4-year institutions. As I mentioned, there's various different options now that students can take other than English 4. So here students are able to take English 4, but now you see they have a variety of different options that they can select from. You have independent study in English, humanities, speaking 3, business, English, and also this, you see at the very bottom right-hand corner, you can see a college prep course in English language arts. That has also been developed out of this bill as well, and I'm going to talk to about that course later on in the presentation to give you an idea of what that is. These are the courses that students can sub or actually replace in that advanced math credit, that 3rd advanced math credit. So you have students have the option to take Algebra 2. Of course, under this bill, they're no longer required to take Algebra 2 as they did under the recommended plan. So you have Algebra 2, pre-calculus, various options in AP courses, and then statistics. So students have various options here as well. As I mentioned, under that 2nd science credit, students can either take IPC or some of these areas to satisfy that 2nd credit. So if they don't take IPC, this is a short list of offerings that satisfy that 2nd credit. And then this is one of the last lists I'll show you under advanced courses to satisfy the 3rd credit in science. Students can take the chemistry, the physics, several different options for advanced placement. There are several locally developed courses that can also be offered over time, so you might want to be aware of that. Again, the variety of different course offerings is what you'll have to pay attention to here. You won't necessarily see biology, chemistry, physics. That's usually under the recommended plan. This information or data just pretty much shows you where we've come as far as college readiness to date. This is showing high school graduates that have enrolled in higher education and met TSI in math. The data reflects fall 2004 to fall 2012. It really just shows that students that have advanced diploma types, such as recommended and distinguished plan, met readiness at a higher rate than those that were at the minimum plan. So if you follow the red line, the bottom, you can see that students were under the minimum plan, met readiness at 41%, and those in the green line have recommended and distinguished plan, so they met readiness at a higher rate than those that were under the minimum plan at 81%, and then you have the dashed black line that represents all diploma types. As you can see, increases over time met readiness. However, if you consider that the foundation program is similar or mirrors the minimum program, we may not be seeing similar increases that we've been seeing. This data just generally represents the percentage of high school students who met ACT college readiness benchmarks in math. This is based on course taking patterns in high schools, and this is actually the most recent data of students graduating in 2013. This is self-reported data, so students that took more, it just basically shows you that students that took more math had a higher rate of college readiness than students that took 3 courses or less. Right there in red, you see those that took 3 less than 3 years of math were only at 14% ready, and those that took 3 courses of math were at 14% as well. But as you see students taking more math, 4 credits or more, the increases start happening at that time. And then those that are at 60%, they're more rigorous math courses. So the more rigorous math, the more college ready the student is. So I've shared with you the foundation program, and as I mentioned, the bill created endorsement areas. These are areas of interest that students can choose to take, which also includes 4 science credits as well as 4 math credits. The specificity of those credits is really, it varies dependent upon the endorsement the student chooses to take. So those are not really specific or prescribed. A student can choose out of one of these 5 areas. That you have STEM, business and industry, public service, arts and humanities, as well as multidisciplinary studies. School districts can offer all 5 of these endorsements or multiple endorsements, but they do have to offer at least one, which is the multidisciplinary studies. So the foundation plus the endorsement is what's the default for incoming freshmen. However, they do have opportunities to opt out of that. As I mentioned, the math can look different under the endorsement area. So this is a similar list to what I showed you earlier that would satisfy that 4th credit in math. However, this also references that college prep course in math that I'll talk to you shortly about. Just to give you another understanding that, again, it doesn't have to be Algebra 2. It could be several different of these options. You have the 4th science credit to earn an endorsement. Again, there are options for chemistry, physics, but you also have all these various options like AP biology, AP chemistry, food science, forensic science, and all these other options available for that 4th credit under an endorsement area. I'm going to give you some examples of what the endorsements might look like. I won't go through all 5 of them. I'm just going to give you some understanding or some information about what options are available to students under certain endorsements. This is the basic understanding of business and industry endorsement. Here, students have a couple of options under this endorsement as well. You have students can take a coherent sequence of 4 or more courses under CTE with at least 2 credits in the same career cluster. Students can choose from any of these areas that are listed here. They can choose marketing, manufacturing, business management, and administration. So they can choose from any one of these areas under CTE career clusters. The other option within this endorsement is students can take 4 or more elective credits by selecting certain levels of these offerings. I think you guys can see at the very bottom of the screen. They can take public speaking, debate, or advanced journalism. There's a few options that are available to satisfy the business and industry endorsement. This is the STEM endorsement. And this endorsement will include students take Algebra 2, chemistry, and physics. There, again, are a couple of options within this endorsement. You have students can take a coherent sequence of 4 or more courses in CTE, again, with 2 credits within the same career cluster. Or option B could be a coherent sequence of 4 credits in computer sciences selected from either computer science, game programming and design, robotics, and there's several others here that are listed. And finally, one other example of endorsement is the multidisciplinary studies. Again, this is the one the school districts will be required to offer. There's several options under this endorsement as well, and this endorsement probably mirrors the 4x4 currently the most. You have students can take various options here. So you have 4 advanced credits that would prepare them for the workforce successfully or into post-secondary education without remediation. Students can choose from within one endorsement area or among different endorsement areas that are not in a coherent sequence. Or they can get into 4 credits of each of the 4 foundation areas to include English 4, as well as chemistry and or physics. And the final option for them is 4 credits in advanced placement, IB, or dual credit in some of these selected areas, such as English, math, science, social studies. So this is the distinguished level of achievement that's been developed. It's 26 credits. This is all of the foundation program requirements, plus the curriculum requirements for at least 1 endorsement area. Students also must take 4 credits in math, and this, which would include Algebra 2. So they'd be required to take Algebra 2 under this distinguished level of achievement. They also would need 4 credits in science and 2 additional elective credits. This would be, they would need to fall under the distinguished level of achievement would be required for eligibility for automatic admissions and top 10% for graduating class. As I mentioned earlier, I talked a little bit about the college prep course that can satisfy some of those advanced English or the advanced math. The college prep course is a locally developed course between a school district and at least 1 institution of higher education. It's developed for both the math and English language arts. It's generally recommended for students that are identified that did not, 12th grade students that did not meet college readiness. It is an optional course, it's not required, but the school districts are encouraged to say the benefits or explain the benefits of taking the course. Upon successful completion of this course, students would be exempt from TSI requirements for that content area. So they'd be exempt from math or English language arts, but only at that partnering institution or institutions that they have. School districts and higher ed institutions are going to be partnering, and they'll develop an MOU, and so they'll spell out what successful completion of the course would mean, who would take the course, what the curriculum would look like. All of those should be spelled out in an MOU. It's important to note here that the duration of the exemption and its applicability to non-partnering institutions is what is going to be decided in a negotiated rulemaking process actually happening this week, I think on Wednesday. So some of the rules here are right now this is what statute says, but depending upon what comes out of that meeting, we may be making some changes. So out of all this information that I've shared with you, all the various different options, the takeaway really is to show that several students will now be coming in with several different diploma types. They'll be coming in with different various different levels, and so it's important just to note that there's this whole period of transition that'll be happening all the way till 2018. So that's the overview of House Bill 5 in a nutshell, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that I might be able to. Any questions?
Yes, got one. Question. We're having a lot of discussion we have 38 ISDs in our area. We're trying through Region 20 to develop a course that then could be shared. But there's a lot of, I guess, a little bit difference of opinion about rigor and about, who ought to get into that, what's it going to take to get out of it. Where we are right now, it appears that we may just have to do the best we can, agreeing, and then evaluate the results of those students who come to us and take that first college level class, see how they do, and then we want to put in the MOU. We'll come back to you with that information. Do you have any other suggestions, or is anybody else doing anything different with that?
We do get several calls and several questions around this, but we really do not have any go-to. I mean, we've been sitting in on some of Region 20's meetings to develop this course, so we're aware of where that goes. And I can understand the complexities of the agreements, but we really try to make sure that our higher ed partners are a voice in making sure that students are, that the courses are rigorous enough to satisfy this TSI exemption. And so we are really encouraging those meetings to make sure that you guys are able to talk. But they could, and as you see, since they're locally developed, they can look very different across different regions. And so we don't, again, we are putting out some guidelines that I know, general guidelines, but the guidelines pretty much say that, to make sure that when you partner with the school district, that you maintain that level of rigor and utilize the CCRS, the standards, as well as consider using the TSI as your assessment and things like that. But I'm not certain when those are going to be available, but we've shared those here and there.
So if there's a meeting on Wednesday, do you think there might be something from that that's going to help us a little bit?
Well, the only two areas that they're going to decide on is the duration of the exemption and the applicability among non-partnering institutions. So those are the only two areas that we have authority under, because there's a lot of local development. We don't really have authority over that. So, like I said, we did. There is a draft of guidelines for higher ed that's being internally reviewed and hopefully will be available soon.
Claudette.
Yes.
One additional question regarding college preparatory course.
Yes, ma'am.
We know it's designed for the 12th grader who is not college ready.
Right.
If we write in the MOU and give the school districts authority to define 11th graders who are also seen as not college ready, can we still use that college preparatory course that we've designed with them?
To my knowledge, yes. Again, because it's a locally developed course, whatever you agree to with that partnership is what you guys will be using. So we've seen some, and again, these are rumors, so I don't want to put it out there, but we have heard that a lot of areas may be using the course or requiring it of several students, but really just depends upon the local development and the partnership agreement. So that's really all I have to say.
From an instructional design point of view, it is rather straightforward to use the learning outcomes from the highest level developmental as a potential for assessing whether or not these students are college ready.
Don, that's the easy part.
I know.
The hard part is who gets in it, because there's a lot of discussion about they're not passing the end of course exam for Algebra 1. If they get in that as a senior and you're thinking you're going to try to get them all the way to college ready, that's a long stretch.
Well, here's something I might add. There has been some confusion about that course too, about who is to go into that course, and you're referencing Section 39 for those that didn't meet the end of course requirements. However, this course is really designed under that Section 28, and so you don't necessarily. It's not for those students that didn't meet end of course exams. It's now students that just didn't meet college readiness.
Okay, that helps. And then of course our faculty are concerned about the exit test in those courses and whether or not, you can have, even if you could agree on a test, which we can't, but even if you could, the grading could be quite different, particularly in all those areas. So.
Correct. And that's why one of the recommendations that we have, of course, these are just recommendations that we've drawn out, is that they use the TSI, since that's aligned with the college and career readiness standards.
The pre-assessment.
Right. Well, right. And so one of the things, though, that we hear in the field is that it's costly. So we understand that not everyone would be able to do that.
And then the other argument for that is in our highest level of developmental ed, we don't require that. Right. They take a TSI. So then the high school's wondering, well, if you don't require it for your own, why would you require it for ours? Right. So, there's just this sort of whole swirling discussion.
Right, and we don't know until students take the course. As you mentioned, we won't know the outcome of any of this, actually, until students begin in the fall.
Any other questions for Claudette? Thank you so much for coming up and sharing with us. it's very helpful to get information as it's available, and I think this is one of those initiatives, or rather one of those policies where we'll update you as we know. And so we appreciate your feedback and your patience. We're going to move on to the last agenda item, which is an update on closing the gaps. Julie Eklund will lead that discussion, so take it away, Julie.
Hello, back to me. If I look a little less happy than I did this morning, I heard from my husband at lunch that we had hail in South Austin today, and I got a new roof 2 weeks ago, but I'm trying not to think about it. Okay, I'm going to very quickly go through the Closing the Gaps update. I've got some new data for you I thought you might be interested in seeing, so we'll quickly go through my PowerPoint slides. See, I'm smiling now. You're all laughing with me. We'll go through the PowerPoints. I'll talk a little bit about the numbers, about Flex, and I do want to have some time for discussion to hear what's happening at your institutions, what trends you're seeing, what you're predicting for fall. As we did with the meeting that we did last year at the end of accountability, we've got a couple of survey questions that you can use your phones to answer. We wanted to get a little sense of what you're seeing in terms of numbers for those of you who are here. I haven't heard any questions come in from the field. What I'm guessing is that when we got that microphone shut off, we lost everyone. And I apologize. We didn't have a choice, I think, because we were getting some background noise. I don't know if we're able to open those microphones up and try again so we can let the people who are listening in participate. But if that's possible for the tech folks in the back to do that, please go ahead and do so, and hopefully we won't get the background conversations. Okay, and I just need the remote, and we'll be good to show you some numbers. So as you know, all of you were a very important part of a conversation last year talking about Flex students, and everyone pointed out to us, well, things have changed in terms of Flex students, and we're having more and more. And we really appreciated that feedback, and you explained why and some of the differences. So we are now including Flex students in our counts, I think, which most of you are aware of. Right now, we are at 575,875 students away from our 630,000 goal, and that's for adding additional students into higher education in Texas. One thing that Closing the Gaps does is it looks at changes in participation, not just overall numbers, but changes, and the goal was to add those additional 630,000 students. So when we look at this change, we look at where we were with Flex back in 2000, so we've increased our baseline, and you'll probably see that in the almanac. We've now included Flex numbers on a portion of our Closing the Gaps page. And so we've added those students to our baseline, but when we look at adding the 630,000 additional students, we just look at the additional Flex students added, so we're basically doing that the same as we always have. We're just saying that, yes, we need to add those fall Flex students in addition to the students who were enrolled by census date, because those were, in fact, students who were enrolled in the fall and an important and a growing group. So here's where we are with the numbers. We're down a little bit from last year. We didn't see quite as big a drop at the community colleges as we'd seen the year before, but we did see a drop. Universities, the numbers were up. They're kind of on a steady upward trend. It's pretty much been consistent year to year, but the community colleges, we've seen a lot of variability. As you know, we had some really high jumps for a few years there, and then we've seen a little drop off in the last couple of years. Two-year colleges still continuing to enroll the largest number of students and percentage of students out of all of our students in the state. We have seen African American enrollment grow very rapidly. This is the first time we've seen a drop-off, but when we did calculate in for our Flex students to look at percentages for our African American males, with the fall data, for the first time, we saw the percentage of African American males reaching the target that was established in Closing the Gaps, which was 5.7% of all of our different populations. So that was interesting to see that. Our Hispanic student population has grown very rapidly, but as you can see, we have a very steep trend line that we're trying to match, and we're still not there. So again, we had growth in Hispanic student populations at the two-year colleges, but because of decreases in other populations, we saw an overall decrease. and I don't know what happened with this slide. We lost the number. That's 45,000 approximately students. But you can see that the growth in flex students has more than doubled since 2000. And of course, we've gone up by about 50% for our other enrollments. And here's a breakout for all the race ethnic groups at community colleges. And as I mentioned before, you can see that we've had continued growth in the Hispanic student population. We've increased 116% since 2000. And let's see, I think I brought the numbers for all of these populations. We're also up about 116% for our other population. Part of that is because of changes in how we look at race ethnicity. As you know, the feds made some changes a few years back. We have a lot more students going into the multiracial or other category than we had in the past. Our white population, as you can see, has dropped quite a bit over the last few years. Overall, since 2000, it's up just 13 percentage points. If you look at some of Steve Murdoch's work, you can see that populations really are shifting a lot in Texas. And so some of this just has to do with the percentage of Anglos in the younger population groups has really gone down in Texas, and so some of our enrollments match that. Though we did see, for I think white males, a slight drop in the percentage participation this year. And for African American students, we're up 105% since 2000. So obviously, one of the goals of closing the gaps was to close some of the demographics gaps that we had for students of different backgrounds and for underrepresented students. And Texas has made some progress. Okay, Texas has surpassed its targets for undergraduate awards. We're now including career school awards in this information. And we can look for some of our different populations, which have all surpassed the awards. Happy to see that our Hispanic students are earning awards and degrees at much increased levels than where they were in 2000. We have been moving more slowly in terms of the technology awards, the STEM awards. This is kind of national. This is something that I think other states have seen as well. And as you can see, we really flattened out through 2008, and it's encouraging to see that since then we've had some real growth. Some of this may have to do with some of the computer technology fields where the numbers were very high around 99, 2000 when Closing the Gaps began, and so the baseline started pretty high for that field, and then a lot of students stopped earning degrees in that area for a while. But as you can see from this illustration, we have seen quite a bit of growth since about 2009, 2010. Nursing and allied health, we've seen big jumps. Some of this, we believe, is in response to legislative action, where there have been a lot of resources committed to trying to increase our number of nursing degrees and allied health degrees. And that's it in terms of the basic numbers. I do want to concentrate on the conversation. I'll leave this one up because I think this is interesting. But I think what we may first want to do, and again, I'm sorry Judy Laredo isn't here. She's the assistant commissioner in our P16 area, and she, I think, very much appreciated participating in the conversation last year. We learned a lot from all of you about what was happening at your institutions. We have a few questions for you today just to get a feel for what's happening now, and we'll go through our survey and see what we can discover from that in terms of where you think things are going. I'm sorry. Oh, okay. Do we need to do it from here, or can we jump in the... Okay, so I guess we'll go ahead and we'll put the survey up. Let's do this first and just kind of see where you think you stand in terms of numbers. See if we can get this to work. For those of you, I guess it can be for anyone who's listening, whether you're here or you're listening from your institution. Did your enrollment exceed your expectations last fall? And I think you text a keyword to 22333 and make sure I get this right because Jose handled this last year. And then text enroll 1 if it was yes and enroll 2 if it was no. Is that how this works? We'll see if we can get this to work. Give it a try. I know at least one person weighed in.
And as a reminder, if you're listening in, you can also participate in this poll. You can just text in your answer. Okay, for this group, that's a low response rate.
This too hard?
Yeah, I think if you text, it's much easier than going to the website.
The novelty has worn off a little too. Last year it was very exciting, I have to tell you. So people pretty much expected what they saw last fall. And what do you, and do we have, let's see if we have another minute. For those of you where your enrollment exceeded your expectations, any ideas on why? Why things were better than you thought they would be? Was it something that you did, or was it kind of a surprise? Is it oh, okay. It's hard, those tiny little buttons with the texting. I don't know how my kids do it. Okay. And let's go on to the next slide then, if no one has any comments on this. That's interesting that most people expected the enrollments that they had. And what about coming up this next fall? I know it's early for the university folks. They had a pretty good idea. Most of them thought they were going to sort of continue on the same trend they were on. But the university trend lines tend to be a little more consistent than from the community and technical colleges. So it'll be interesting to see what you're expecting for this fall based on what you've seen thus far. We can't tell who's texting, so your numbers don't have to match it in the end. We're just trying to get a feel for what you're expecting. Yeah. What question? Okay. Okay, so it looks like the no's are winning out, unfortunately, and dropping. The yeses are dropping fast. They're not too bad. Over 40% right now are anticipating an increase. For those, now, do we have a question about the decrease? For those who are anticipating a decrease, you expecting it to be slight, or are you seeing some real number changes? Well, that's why I jumped in and said, for those of you who are not anticipating an increase, I'm just curious if anyone wants to speak up. And is that the next question?
Yes, the next question.
Okay, I couldn't remember if we had a question. Okay. Here we go. Well, let's just keep focusing on the increase and not worry about the decrease. For those anticipating an increase, do you anticipate that your persistence rates are going to get better or be about the same, or you anticipate that you'll have more new enrollments than you typically have? And then both. And what's the last one? I'm sorry. Oh, well, we have all the questions there. I don't need to be adding the additional ones. Yes.
Julie?
Yes.
Are we talking about students or enrollments?
We're talking about enrollments of students. Head count. We're talking about head count enrollment. We're talking about head count enrollment, not full-time student equivalent enrollments.
We're seeing an increase in.
Oh, good. Right. Right. Exactly. And that's why I was saying, I thought I clarified and said head count enrollment. However, this is something we talked about last year, which I'd be really interested to hear. Is last year, folks in this meeting said that we were seeing that in general students were averaging fewer semester credit hours, and they were talking about the economy and that jobs were tight and people were being expected, their employers were expecting them to give more time. And that is a question I had for today. Are you seeing that change? And that's kind of separate from the headcount enrollment. But I see some nods. Are people still seeing that your part-time students the numbers of hours are still lower than at times in the past? You're not seeing that starting to jump up again? Are you seeing more? Okay. So basically what we're seeing is we saw about 50, in the low 50s, expecting an increase. Most folks expect it to be from both persistence and additional enrollments. And then we're going to move on to the lack of increase here. And then you're all telling me that, yes, you're still seeing that students those part-time students especially, are taking fewer hours than you might have seen in the past. Right. No, I understand. Okay. And this question is the lack, if you're not seeing an increase. Okay. Well, we could do that. Yes. And are we seeing, let's talk about policy a little bit, because last year we were getting a strong message that policy changes were contributing to dropping enrollments, or people were concerned about certain policy changes. We talked about the meningitis vaccine policies where everyone thought that was probably just a blip and that would level out. And I don't know if folks are seeing that or if they still think that those requirements are affecting their enrollments. We talked about federal Pell changes. And do folks have a sense that that is still affecting enrollment, those federal Pell changes? I'm saying yes. Are there policy changes that have occurred that you think have helped in terms of enrollments, have made a difference in terms of increasing enrollments? Certainly we would be very happy to hear if you feel like there's some changes that have contributed to improving, whether it's persistence, enrollments, overall success of your students. No sense there. Are there any policies right now that are in addition to those that we just talked about that you think are making a difference for students?
Well, certainly institutions that are either achieving the dream or Texas completes. Most of the institutions that are involved in those have, through policy change, have done away with late registration. And in fact, in many cases, they have up to a full week prior to start of classes as the last day to register. So certainly some of those policy changes have enrollment implications, possibly negative to begin with, but then potentially positive impact on persistence. So I think time will tell on how our data proves out on some of that.
On those, and certainly you all told us last year that you think the flex, that was one of the reasons why the flex numbers may be increasing if you had students show up on the first class day wanting to register rather than having to tell them come back next semester. There's more and more flex being offered. Which leads us to our last question. We might as well put it up there because we're curious. Are institutions continuing to increase those flex courses in terms of what you're offering? I know certainly last year we were hearing that folks were exploring models that might be more like career schools where students took fewer courses but more compressed courses. Wow, well, that's just one person so far. I was all excited. Wow, by a lot. And certainly that's data that we're tracking now. So we'll be very interested to see what happens with the flex courses. There's a lot of innovation going on right now. There are several institutions doing some competency-based education, a lot happening with that related to policy and SACs and some different things there. So certainly that's something new that's coming. Anyone else see anything that's happening in terms of the policy environment, what's happening with students, the feedback you're getting from students? What about in terms of the value of education? Are you getting the sense that, there was some concern, or there's been concern about student debt in relation to value, and a lot of conversations around that, certainly with all this workforce education, workforce information that we're now making available. I know we've had a lot of researchers who are interested in this data, and you may see some things coming out from some of that, folks who are looking at those types of data. Do you find students are asking those types of questions about, what's going to happen when I finish? Will I get a job? How much will I need to borrow? Or do you think those are more conversations around that are happening at universities? Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay. I don't know if anyone. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yep. Oh, okay. So they appreciate having that information about economic outcomes. Okay. Anyone else feel like there's anything that's trending out there? We're here at the coordinating board. We don't have as much contact with students as you do. And I know sometimes folks in IR staff, obviously we have many of you who don't work in IR offices, but I think there are several people on our accountability peer group meetings who are involved in IR, but you're at least out on campuses, and we rely on you to let us know if you see things that are changing. Obviously, it's a top priority for the coordinating board to do everything it can to help institutions reach the Closing the Gaps goals. We're very excited that we've reached them for some of our populations and for some of our goals, but we'd like to certainly get there overall statewide for participation. At least that's a key one, and we're very close. So if there is anything that folks want to share as the year goes along, trends you're seeing as students start to enroll, promising practices that you think would be really important for us to know about, please don't hesitate to share it. Again, last year this meeting was very, very helpful as we were just sort of beginning to dive into looking at some new data and think about closing the gaps. It was very helpful to get your feedback, and we want to continue to let you know that we really do appreciate what you have to share. So again, let us know, and we look forward to bringing you the next round of numbers next year. We'll certainly have some numbers for fall enrollment. The one piece of data we haven't included yet in our final Closing the Gaps participation number is the fall 13 flex. So we'll bring that in once everyone's certified. We're not quite there yet for the 001, but once everyone's certified, that number we hope will go into our Closing the Gaps progress report that we are required to bring to our board this summer. So with those numbers, and we're slicing and dicing things as much as we can. So everyone, if you're interested, please do take a look at that report when we publish it. I think it goes to the committee in June, and it'll go to our board in July. But we try to look and see if we see some different things going on as part of the analysis, numbers that are changing. In our Closing the Gaps, we have a group that meets every Friday here at the coordinating board, and we look at a lot of different numbers. We brainstorm a lot about what's happening in the state, what seems to be affecting the data, student numbers. We talk obviously beyond the numbers, but we try to use data to get a sense of what's happening, and then we have a lot of program staff who will come in and talk about what they're working on, what they're seeing. I think there's an interesting study that's been going on related to summer melt. You might see some research coming out about that later on in the summer, and we're excited to see some final results on that, because there are a lot of students who apply and never show up and get accepted and then never show up again. So again, if any trends you're seeing, any information that you think would be helpful to us, we'd appreciate you sharing them, and we appreciate And I guess I'll open it up. I'm assuming through all of this you would have raised your hand if you had anything else to add now. Yes, please.
Wait till this turns green. Oh, it's on. Yeah, we were just talking about the changes. You were saying what could cause your persistence to go down, and there have been some major changes in financial aid.
Okay.
The SAP, the Satisfactory Academic Progress, has been strengthened, and the total number of hours that you can get financial aid for ever in your life has changed.
Okay, and that's through the federal government regulations. And is that different than last year, as we discussed, or is it you're just starting to see the results of these changes?
It has changed.
Okay. So I think I need to make sure that we're up to date on when those changes have happened and what they've led to. Now, does it look like there are even going to be new changes coming down the pike in terms of that, or does it look like now the major changes have been made in terms of the financial aid eligibility for the federal aid? Does anyone have any idea? You don't know. Okay, so thank you. I wasn't aware that there had been some more changes made. So,
do you mean undergraduate hours?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, and again, I think, as I mentioned before, we've had folks looking at some of our numbers related to that, and we appreciate Gabriella's work that she does for the information that she provides. She has been a very busy woman, as you can imagine, the last year with all of the interest in the workforce data and linking our students to the workforce. So we feel it's important information to have out there. And we're happy to have any feedback that any of you want to share about that too. And I appreciate hearing from. Yeah, and I think that is an important role that the coordinating board plays in terms of data, is that ability to link student data, the K-12 data, to higher ed, and now all the way through to the workforce. And we're happy to do it for all of you. And we did a data training for people from education service centers in February. Ginger and I did, and many of them weren't aware of the rich data that we had available. And we also have a new, I think we showed it to you last year, we had just rolled it out, but we have a new dashboard that tracks from ISD to higher ed that has a lot of our data that we had there before, but it puts it out in a very clear graphic format, easy to use, instead of having to dig through long reports and find your school out of lists and lists of others. But they were thrilled by that. We had a lot of positive feedback on that. I think there's a lot of interest in that high school to college data. We have seen numbers going down there. We're thrilled that just last week, I think Susan was saying, or just this week, we got the graduates from TEA, because they clean them up first and then send them up to us. So we will very soon be getting some new numbers to see what it looks like for the high school to college data. We've even looked at data like for parts of the state where we know folks out of high school are able to earn fairly large salaries for coming right out of high school, to look and see, have we seen patterns change there with students going right on to college, and looked at, is it really the rumors true in terms of the types of salaries we're hearing about that students are earning. So we're really trying to dive deep on both sides, at the high school to college and moving on. And of course, the other hard piece with the high school to college is we get information about the students who graduate, and we track them. But if we lose students before then, they're harder to track. We do have our 8th grade cohort where we look at students from the 8th grade and move onward, and that's actually, I think, very useful information also. So we're trying to create a picture as much as we can that covers some of the different questions that might be raised. But if you have any ideas at all for that type of data that would be helpful to those of you who work in enrollment management, if we can help you with anything there, certainly under HB 25, we're going to have the new information also that's going to come out about those very low-performing schools. We'll break out the numbers and really see who from those schools are going on to higher ed and who's not. And I hope that'll be useful to you to have that level of detail about those students. So is anything else about closing the gaps in enrollment and where we stand? Well, thank you for joining in and for the comments that you did add. And I'm going to turn it back to Ginger. And it looks like it says 3:02. I apologize. I was close.
Thank you. and have a great afternoon. Safe travels. For those of you listening in, thank you again, and we'll see you next year.